Good evening. I'd like to welcome everyone to tonight's regular meeting of the Portsmouth Planning Board for October 20th, 2011. Before we get into the agenda tonight, I'd like to welcome our newest member, Brian Groth.
That's right.
Great. So welcome, Brian. The longer you're here, the closer you get to the middle before you head out, so welcome. So, I'd like to get right into the approval of the minutes for tonight. And we have two items. The approval of the minutes from the August 18, 2011 Planning Board meeting.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? The chair votes aye. And second item is the approval of the minutes from the September 1st, 2011 Planning Board work session.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? And the chair votes aye. We'll now go into public hearings, of which there are probably
Too
12. The board's action in these matters has been deemed to be quasi-judicial in nature. If any person believes any member of the board has a conflict of interest, that issue should be raised at this point or will be deemed waived. If the board would indulge me, I would like a motion to take items B and C out of order for purposes of reading them in and postponing them.
Second.
So moved.
Wow.
Second. We're gonna
Second.
Second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? The chair votes aye. We'll read in now items B and C. We'll take them out of order. I'll read them into the record, and then we'll end up postponing them until December. Item B is the application of Mitchell and Edward Hyder, owners, for property located at 659 and 677 Dennett Street and 295 Woodbury Avenue, requesting a conditional use permit under Section 10.726 of the zoning ordinance for residential density incentive planned unit development, consisting of one 4-unit building and one 5-unit building with related paving, lighting, utilities, landscaping, drainage, and associated site improvements. Said property is shown on Assessor Map 161 as lots 31 and 32, and Assessor Map 175 as lots 6 and 6A, and lie within the General Residence A district. This application was postponed from the September 15, 2011 Planning Board meeting. I'll read in item C, the application of Mitchell and Edward Hyder, owners, for property located at 659 and 677 Dennett Street and 295 Woodbury Avenue, requesting a site plan approval to construct a 9-unit residential development with one 4-unit building and one 5-unit building with related paving, lighting, utilities, landscaping, drainage, and associated site improvements. Said property is shown on Assessor Map 161 as lots 31 and 32, and Assessor Map 175 as lots 6 and 6A, and lie within the General Residence A district. Could I have a motion for item B to be postponed until December's Planning Board meeting?
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? The chair votes aye. Item C, could I have a postponement until the December Planning Board meeting?
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? And the chair votes aye. Thank you, Board. We'll now move on to item A under public hearings, the request to rezone 7 parcels of land on the westerly side of Lafayette Road from the Office Research District to the Gateway District. Said properties are identified as 1700 Lafayette Road, unnumbered Lafayette Road, which is map 252, lot 1-7, 1900 Lafayette Road, 1950 Lafayette Road, 2000 Lafayette Road, 2010 Lafayette Road, and 2032 Lafayette Road. This hearing was postponed from the September 15th, 2011 Planning Board meeting. Rick, could you give us an update on this?
Sure. Yes, as mentioned, this was at the September meeting. There was quite a bit of input from residents and on the proposed change to from Office Research to Gateway, and there was the Planning Board had quite a bit of discussion about the issues that were related to that. At that time, the board asked the Planning Board to look at changes to the Office Research or Gateway districts that would enhance the development potential of the existing those 7 OR parcels while still protecting the residential neighborhood. We looked at this. We looked at several options, including rezoning to a different existing zoning district, rezoning to a modified Gateway district, and amending the Office Research District to provide more flexibility for development. And after reviewing the options, the department believes the best course at this time is to keep the parcels zoned Office Research, but to modify the dimensional standards of the Office Research District in 4 respects. reduce the required lot area from 3 acres to 2 acres, reduce the required street frontage from 300 feet to 200 feet, reduce the required lot depth from 300 feet to 200 feet, and reduce the required side yard, which is the building setback, from 75 feet to 50 feet. These changes will make the Office Research District comparable to the industrial district, except for the front yard. And up to, as of now, the Office Research District is the most stringent district in terms of location of the building on the site. So this would not change any of the allowed uses in these 7 lots or in any other lots that are zoned Office Research, but would just provide some more flexibility for development. And we looked through, there are 5 Office Research Districts in the city altogether. The one on Lafayette Road, a large one on Borthwick Avenue around the hospital, another large one on Commerce Way and Portsmouth Boulevard, the very complex one on North Mill Pond, Bartlett Street, and Kate Street, and then a single lot on Market Street at I-95. And we looked at the impacts of this, and there's very limited development potential in most of these districts. It does not appear that these dimensional changes would necessarily create more buildable lots, but it would provide more development flexibility. We think this makes sense, and so that's what our recommendation is. We also are recommending 2 minor changes to the table of use regulations for the Office Research District. Again, this would apply throughout the city. One is to allow assisted living center as an allowed use, which it currently is in the business and general business districts and the Gateway District. And then the other one is to allow a club, fraternal, or service organization by special exception. So this is just, these are non-retail uses. It seems that it would add another potential use to this area, but it would not be the kind of use that would create a lot of traffic, light, noise, and so forth. So those are our recommendations, to make those 4 changes to the dimensional standards and 2 changes to the use regulations.
Okay. Do we have any questions for the department before we open up the public hearing? No? Do you have anything else?
That's all.
That being said, I'd now like to open up the public hearing. If there's anybody that has a comment, 2 or 4 these suggested and proposed changes.
Good evening. My name is Mark Allenson. I live at 2007 Lafayette Road. Am I allowed to ask questions, or yes or no?
Yeah,
Can I
absolutely.
just hear the dimensional?
Sure.
Like, how close to Lafayette Road can they be? And what's the change?
The change is, well, actually, there's no real effect on Lafayette Road. We're changing the front setback. It currently, in the Office Research District, is 75, let me get it again, 75 feet, I believe. 75 feet, and it would be reduced to 50 feet. But on Lafayette Road, in general, there's actually a 30-foot setback that overrides everything. So it wouldn't affect anything in that area in terms of setback.
I'd just like to make a comment that I applaud the planning department for following the master plan. I think you followed it right to the writing. You left it Office Research. As far as I'm concerned, I think it's a good change. Hopefully it will satisfy the owner of the property. Considering that there's only one piece of property left out there, most people, there was a fraternity hall out there. It's probably, it will keep what else is already out there intact. So I'd just like to applaud the planning department. Thank you.
Thank you. Other speakers that would like to speak 2 for or against? Second time? Third and final time? Seeing no one rise, I'll now close the public hearing. Yes, I would like a motion.
I'll get a motion on the floor so we can discuss. I'd vote that we recommend to revise the zoning ordinance as presented in the Planning Department memo dated October for today's meeting with both items 1 and 2 with the dimensional changes and the changes to the use table.
Second.
Second, discussion on the motion? Ms. Gafford?
I'm wondering whether, there's been any consideration of restaurants, 9.4, 9.5, small retail or inn or daycare. And the reason I'm asking is I understand that there's a considerable amount of neighborhood disinclination to change the OR, and I understand that, but I'm looking at the space and thinking, if we adhere to the dimensional changes that you've offered and we restrict, we add a couple more uses, it might, it's not that I want to help the developer, I really am thinking about the plan for that corridor. So those are my thoughts, and I understand this is a tough thing that I'm raising.
Well, we actually went through the entire use table and looked at every single use that was different between the gateway and the office research, and really did not, we thought about that. We thought about each use, and we were just too, based on the information, the comments from the last meeting, we were concerned about things that would generate light and traffic, and just, I think in terms of the small retail and the restaurant, we were just concerned that those are the types of uses that get into the gateway type of district. And understand that was our goal originally, was to make the entire corridor gateway, but I think we've heard a number of times from residents that they don't want that, and so that we decided to not recommend that. In terms of inns, we actually didn't spend a lot of time. We didn't focus on that at all, so we could go back and look at that again. But I have no strong feeling about that either way at this point.
And daycare?
I don't know.
And the reason I'm asking is I'm really thinking not only of this particular OR corridor, but also the other ones. We've got Borthwick. The whole Kate Street thing I sort of pull out because I think that's going to get redone anyway. Commerce Way, I think, more dicey for retail, but I don't think Borthwick would suffer terribly if it had a ground level retail there, or a ground level completely enclosed restaurant, which was the kind I was talking about. So anyway,
And one other thing, I believe, I have to go back and look at the regulations since I'm not looking at them right now, but I think hotels might be allowed in some OR districts because you have the one on Portsmouth Boulevard, which I believe is OR.
Right, I thought that was a grandfathering.
That grandfathering? Okay.
And anyway, an inn is different. I think a hotel is like 1050 and an inn is, I'll look.
Yeah, okay.
Other comments? Mr. Gladhill?
Yeah, Ms. Geff brought up a good point. I didn't think about daycare. Daycare and office research area, thank you. Daycare and office research center would almost go in hand, where large area where people work, be able to have their kids nearby where they're working. Easy pick, drop off, easy pick up.
Yep. Correct. We should look at that.
Maybe a special exception or something like that.
Yeah, I don't think we would look at, I think that we could move ahead with this at this time and then look at that in the future.
Right.
Yeah, okay.
Right, possibly, right. Any other comments? No. Then I'll call the vote. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? The chair votes aye. So, thank you, ML, for those comments. If I could indulge the board yet again, I would like to have a motion to read item D under public hearings and item C under city council referrals and requests. Read them in together and vote on them separately where it's the same applicant.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? And the chair votes aye. We will read in item D under public hearings, the application of Dexter and Ellen Legg, owners, for property located at 4 Mobus Terrace for conditional use permit under section 10.1017 of the zoning ordinance for work within a tidal wetland buffer, including the demolition of the existing house and garage and construction of a 1.5-story house and garage, demolition of the existing deck and construction of a smaller deck, installation of a 200-square-foot patio, removal of all artificial turf and associated landscaping. Said property is shown on Assessor Map 207 as Lot 24 and lies within the Single Residence B District. I'll now read in item D under City Council referrals and requests, the letter from Dexter Legg requesting a license for a new driveway at 4 Mobus Terrace. Who's here tonight on behalf of the applicant?
Hello, my name is Brendan McNamara. I'm here to speak on behalf of Dexter Legg for the 4 Mobus Terrace project. I'm the designer on the project, here tonight also with the landscape architect Terence Parker. I'd just like to run through a quick description of what's going on. It's somewhat described there, but
If you want to just grab that microphone, just pull it right out.
Great.
And,
thank you. We have an existing property, and the existing house in its entirety of the wooden structure is going to be demolished. So everything wood is gone. There's an existing garage sitting in this area here, and the garage foundation, which is frost walls, is going to be demolished and removed. The new house proposed is going to be built on a new frost wall foundation out here for the new garage, and we are reusing the existing foundation for the new house. The other substantive demolition that's going to go on, at the moment there's an extremely large deck on the western side. It runs almost the full length of the house. That's totally gone, and it's going to be replaced by a much smaller deck at one end of that existing foundation. There's the house is being elevated somewhat. As a result of that, there's a small grade change on the higher contours up on the roadside. There's a small amount of excavation on the southeastern corner. There is some more larger windows being put into the walkout basement, and to get clearance, there's about a foot of earth being taken away to allow for them. It's actually been taken away from an area where it's been already filled when they did the original foundation. Terence is here to talk on plantings and general landscaping issues, but if you had any other questions in terms of the structure and the building change, happy to answer them.
no.
Hello, my name is Terence Parker of Terra Firma Landscape Architecture. Just so you know, we have received our shoreline permit, our standard dredge permit from the DES, and have gotten approval from Concom. Last week, or 2 weeks ago, Concom asked us to recalculate some of the coverage just within the 100-foot setback, and that is submitted on the plan that you have. So it still is a net reduction from the impervious surface that's there now. It drops, 3.7% in the 100-foot setback, but overall on the whole site, it drops 4.5%. So we are gaining in all the metrics that are measured by DES. This is a plus in terms of impervious, and so the plantings try to reflect that with. Maintaining most of the marsh grass there. We're going to pull out the invasive species that are in the setback area between the wall and the salt marsh, and we're going to install native plant materials to continue that buffer zone along here. So we're removing, it's completely an altered state right now. If you know the site, there's a big putting green and AstroTurf front yard, and it's mown lawn in the back. So there's a lot of removal of either real turf or AstroTurf in favor of native plant materials. So it's really gaining in all the metrics that can be measured in that regard. So we are, just so you know, we were leaving a portion of the existing drive here as the standard pavers that are there now for guest parking, but we're removing most of that. And the new surface over here for the drive and the front walk will be permeable pavers. So if you have any questions, I'd be glad to answer that.
questions for the applicant? Thank you. I'll now open up the public hearing if there's anybody in the public wishing to speak to, for, or against the application. Second time? Third and final time? Seeing no one rise, I'll now close the public hearing. So we have 2 items on the agenda. One is the conditional use permit, and the second one would be the city council referrals and requests for the license for a new driveway.
I'll make, I'm sorry?
Mr. Blankenship?
I'll second it.
Oh,
Okay, he's going to second.
Mr. Rice?
All right, well, I'm going to make a motion that we vote to grant the conditional use permit as requested with the following stipulation, that during construction, the site shall be stabilized as soon as possible and proper erosion control measures shall be used to prevent any impacts to the tidal wetlands and salt marsh area.
Second.
Second, thank you. Discussion on the motion? Call the vote. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? And the chair votes aye as well. Move on to city council referrals and requests. A letter from Dexter Legg requesting a license for a new driveway at 4 Mobus Terrace. Anything you want to?
No, this is just, the request is, as was described, that they're moving the driveway to the other side of the property. They're moving it to a street, paper street that was laid out but was never constructed. The city council has previously granted a license to another property owner on that same piece of public land. And so the request is to allow their driveway to cross and access the existing driveway and access Mobus Terrace from that direction. And there's, our recommendation is the license be granted as requested.
I'll make a
Mr. Blankenship?
motion that we recommend the license be granted as requested.
Second.
Second. Discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? And the chair votes aye. Thank you. Items, we'll now move on to item E, under public hearings, the application of Portsmouth Housing Authority owner for property located at 444 Pleasant Street for conditional use permit approval under section 10.1017 of the zoning ordinance for work within a tidal wetland buffer, including the construction of roof extensions to the existing decks to provide weather protection. Said property is shown on Assessor Map 102 as Lot 54 and lies within the General Residence B District in the Historic District. Who's here tonight on behalf of the applicant?
Hi, my name is Jeff Oliva. I'm with Civil Consultants, and I'm here representing the Portsmouth Housing Authority for this project. As you can see in your package, we're proposing to extend the roof covering to the rear deck to these 2 buildings. Presently, when they were constructed, for some reason they weren't extended over the stairs, and as a result, in the wintertime, they fill up with water, ice, and snow and can't be used. So this roof extension is part of an overall renovation to the Housing Authority's properties at State, Pleasant, and Woodbury Manor, where they're getting new roofs. The exteriors are being cleaned, and windows and areas caulked and weatherized that way. But this project here, being located within 100 feet of the tidal area, requires us to receive a conditional use permit. We've been to the Conservation Commission last week, had approval there, and basically what we're doing on the back sides of each one of these buildings is adding an extension of 1 foot 3 inches, and that will provide us coverage over the stairs. I believe in the packages submitted that there are pictures and drawings that indicate our extension, and also at the request of the Conservation Commission, we're going to be installing 2 drywalls off of each that direct the gutter flow from those roofs into that prior to that stormwater being discharged over land into the tidal area. That's really about the gist of it. I can answer questions afterwards.
Thank you. Questions for the applicant? Ms. Roberts?
Yeah, you mentioned 2 dry wells, and I see one on the site plan. Maybe I'm missing.
Yeah, there's. If we look up here, we can kind of see that there's the 2 buildings, and each is represented by the circle that's on here. So we have one on this side and one on that side.
Thank you.
What we're having here for coverage is about 72 square feet of new roof area.
The dry wells, did you do any soils work around them?
We didn't, and it's really, technically, it probably won't work very well as a dry well, just based on the soils out there, being a lot of clay material once you get down below. So I think it's more of a kind of a retention, hope it infiltrates, and then the rest of it's going to overflow. It'd be a slow infiltration dry well.
Right. What elevation are these going to go in at? Do you know?
They're going to be flush with the grass out there. About behind the buildings is a grassed area that's mowed by the housing authority, and the idea is that these will be flush with the grade surface.
Do you have any concerns with these icing up and then icing back up?
Not really, because I think once it gets cold, the water is going to be in snow, and it's not going to get into that area. And it's really an area where people don't access the rear of the property, the elderly tenants of the structure.
Okay. Other questions for the applicant? Thank you. I'll now open up the public hearing. If there's anybody in the public wishing to speak to, for, or against the application. Second time, third and final time, seeing no one rise, I'll now close the public hearing.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Rice.
I'll make a motion that we vote to grant the conditional use permit as requested.
Second.
Second. Discussion on the motion? Mr. Blank. I'm sorry, Mr. Gladhill.
This still has to come before the HDC, because it is, am I correct? Or is it?
I believe it does, yes. I think it's on the agenda.
This?
I'll call the vote. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? And the chair votes aye. Thank you.
Thank you.
We'll move on to item F under public hearings. The application of the Baroni Family LLC owners and Joseph R. Baroni applicant for property located off Constitution Avenue for earth product removal under sections 10.1022, 10.1023, and 10.1024 of the zoning ordinance. Said property is shown on Assessor Map 274 as Lot 5 and lies within the industrial district. Who's here tonight on behalf of the applicant?
I am Eric Weinrib with Altus Engineering. Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. I'm representing the Baroni family and 755 Banfield Road Realty, LLC. We were before the board last month for the excavation materials removal plan, and at the board last month referred the project back to TAC. We presented at TAC, and they had 5 stipulations added to the plans and conditions. We've added those to the plans, which is that we would mark the wetland buffer, the 100-foot wetland buffer, because we're not doing any work within the 100-foot buffer. So we'd mark that in the field so that the contractor removing the material would know where that is. We removed the note saying that there would be work on Saturdays, because that's not allowed. And we identified that the travel route because it's projected that the materials taken off the site will be going to Rye, will not be, it will be from Constitution down Lafayette, and it will continue to Washington Road and not down Lang Road. And the reason is that limits the amount of traffic on city streets. So it will be Constitution to a state right-of-way to the town of Rye, and they'll travel that way through town. They also wanted as a condition of the approval, that a survey of the condition of Constitution Avenue will be taken before the construction and submitted to DPW, just to make sure that there's no deterioration of the roadway. And the last condition was that a bond would be posted in the amount as determined by DPW before commencement of the earth removal activities. And just in summary, we are coming in, we're working on larger development plans for the property. We're in the process of acquiring the land in front of the property from the city to increase the parcel size, and we're looking at in the vicinity of a 60,000 square foot office warehouse building there. If this application, this work would be incidental if we were coming for the site review, so that they wanted to do that ahead of time so that they could remove earth material. the large rocks that are on the site, and it's perfect for a seawall on some other properties. Any questions?
Questions for the applicant?
It's not a question, just kind of an explanation. This doesn't come before the board very often. This is the first time that it's come before the board since I've been here. But we have this section of the zoning ordinance on earth products removal and placement, and it's not a conditional use permit. It's simply a permit. It's described as a permit in state law. So you're just granting a permit. I'm expecting to have another application come before you in the next month or two for earth products placement. So we'll get a shot at both varieties of this. But just want to let you know this is something different than you've done in any other application in the recent past.
So questions for the applicant? Thank you. I'll now open up the public hearing. If there's anybody in the public wishing to speak to, for, or against the application. Second time. Third and final time, seeing no one rise, I'll now close the public hearing. Ms. Hayden.
I'll make a motion that we grant the earth product removal permit, and I just want to also say I thank the applicant, because I know we had quite a bit of discussion at last month's planning board meeting whether to send it back to TAC or not, and I think it came back a better plan looking at travel routes and wetland buffers and the bond, so it is appreciated. I think it was worthwhile for the project.
Second. Discussion on the motion? Call the vote. All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? And the chair votes aye. Thank you.
Thank you.
We'll now move on to item G, the application of Troy and Diane Thibodeau, owners, for property located at 240 Elwyn Road and property off Taft Road, and Frank and Linda Ashton, owners, for property located at 79 Taft Road, wherein preliminary and final subdivision approval is requested between 3 lots as follows. Lot 85 is shown on Assessment Map 247, increasing in area from 12,682 square feet to 15,000 square feet, with 132 feet of continuous street frontage on Taft Road. Lot 86 is shown on Assessment Map 247, increasing in area from 7,969 square feet to 8,797 square feet, with 103 feet of continuous street frontage on Taft Road. And Lot 88 is shown on Assessor Map 247, decreasing in area from 19,942 square feet to 16,796 square feet, with 100 feet of continuous street frontage on Elwyn Road. Said properties are located in a single residence B district where the minimum lot size is 15,000 square feet and minimum street frontage requirement is 100 feet. Who's here tonight on behalf of the applicant?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, members of the Planning Board, John Shagnon from Ambit Engineering, representing Troy Thibodeau on this application. What you have before you is relocation of some lot lines, as mentioned, on Taft Road and Elwyn Road. The currently there are 3 lots there, one being the Taft Road lot southerly side is a sort of a triangular piece. There's another smaller lot on Taft Road to the north of that. Those 2 lots were part of a subdivision that was known as Elwyn Park. The lot on Elwyn Road, which is a rectangle, came out of a piece before the subdivision, although it is adjacent to the subdivision. The proposal is to simply take this line here and move it up to this location to the northeast, thus creating a lot which now has a conforming area. So there would be no doubt that it's a buildable lot once this lot line relocation is approved. At the same time, Mr. Thibodeau wants to provide his neighbor, the Ashtons on Taft, with some additional land, and so we're proposing to move this lot line slightly to the west, and that will make that lot, although it is currently non-conforming, it will become a little bit more conforming and have a little more breathing room in the back. And I understand from the staff memo that you would be asked to apply a waiver to that. We would ask you to approve that waiver because it only makes the lot more conforming, moving towards more conforming status. That's pretty much it. It's a simple application. I guess I'll answer any questions that you might have The staff proposed conditions are fine with the applicant. We have no problem with any of those conditions and would expect that would be a part of your approval.
Okay, questions for the applicant? Thank you.
Thank you.
I'll now open up the public hearing. If there's anybody in the public wishing to speak to, for, or against the application. Second time, third and final time, seeing no one rise, I'll now close the public hearing. I believe we need to, that's the waiver first before we make a motion, correct?
Correct.
All right. Mr. Blenkinsop?
I'll make a motion to waive compliance with section 6.2 of the subdivision rules and regulations to allow the lot dimensions as shown on the subdivision plan.
Second.
Second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? And the chair votes aye. If we could have a motion on the preliminary and final subdivision approval?
Mr. Chairman, I'll move that. Just one comment, though. I think there might be, maybe not a typo, but just an oversight on the description of Lot 86. See how my plan reading skills pay out here. The description of Lot 86 talks about 103 foot of continuous street frontage. I think it doesn't include the additional length of the arc C1, which is another 35 feet, 35.73 feet.
And L2.
And the L2,
And the
probably.
L2, yeah.
And, well, L2 is the end, right?
It would be a short length. Yeah. L2 was 12 feet. So it would be an extra 35 plus 12 roughly.
Right.
So,
So I just don't want to, I mean, it's insignificant really to the proposal, because those don't change, I don't believe, those
no.
lengths, but it should be maybe so noted as the right overall frontage along Taft Road.
Yes.
Can we just make sure that they concur that that is?
Correct. 150 feet, I think, is about the appropriate number for that lot.
Thank you, Mr. Hoffman.
Yes. So I'll move the approval.
Okay.
Second.
Second. Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? And the chair votes aye. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, big up.
All right, board, I'm going to ask for your indulgence one last time. Can I have a motion to read items H and I in together and to hear them as one, but we'll vote on them separately?
So moved.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? And the chair votes aye. I'll read in item H, the application of Brian and Susan Regan, owners for property located at 28 and 30 Dearborn Street, and Regan Electric Company, Inc., owner for property located at 6 Dearborn Street. We're in preliminary and final subdivision approval is requested between two lots as follows. Lot 1 is shown on Assessor Map 140, decreasing in area from 14,311 square feet to 13,182 square feet, with 145 feet of continuous street frontage on Dearborn Street. And Lot 4 is shown on Assessor Map 123, increasing in area from 12,821 square feet to 13,950 square feet, with 91 feet of continuous street frontage on Dearborn Street and 27 feet of street frontage on Maplewood Avenue. Said properties are located in the General Residence A District, where the minimum lot size is 7,500 square feet and the minimum street frontage requirement is 100 feet. I'll read in item A as well. The application of Brian and Susan Regan, owners, for property located at 28 and 30 Dearborn Street, where in preliminary and final subdivision approval is requested to subdivide one lot into two lots as follows. Proposed Lot 1 having 6,750 square feet and 55 feet of continuous street frontage on Dearborn Street, and proposed Lot 2 having 6,432 square feet and 90 feet of continuous street frontage off Dearborn Street. Said property is located in the General Residence A District, where the minimum lot size is 7,500 square feet and the minimum street frontage requirement is 100 feet. Do you have anything?
I would just like to let the board know that there was this was a matter of a Board of Adjustment hearing. The Board of Adjustment granted variances for this, to allow this subdivision to proceed. On Tuesday evening, there was a request for rehearing, which the board did not grant. But today, at the end of the day today, we received another request for rehearing. So this will likely be before the Board of Adjustment at its November meeting, whether to grant the rehearing or not. And if they grant the rehearing, then it would go to the board's December meeting to actually reconsider the application for variances. So I guess I just want to raise that because there may be some uncertainty as to whether the subdivision can move forward. And if you want to take action on it, it probably should be subject to final disposition by the Board of Adjustment or maybe a subsequent court action.
Or we could postpone it until...
Or you could postpone it.
So what I thought we'd do, Board, if it makes sense, is I think the applicant's here. I think they should present, knowing full well that the Board of Adjustment has some action in front of them. But I thought it'd be appropriate that we hear it, and we can act on it however we so choose to. But I'd like to at least let the applicant present. We'll open up the public hearing, and then we'll make a decision from there. So I think that would make sense. So that being said, who's here tonight on behalf of the applicant?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. I'm here on behalf of Susan Regan. With me also is Chris Berry, the engineer who did the plan. Jack McGee is here on behalf of Regan Electric and Brian Regan. Just so you'll know what the law is, case law is very clear in the state of New Hampshire that a Superior Court appeal does not stay the action of the Board of Adjustment. In other words, if the Board of Adjustment were to grant me a variance to build a house and somebody appealed it to the Superior Court, I could continue to build my house, however I would be doing so at my own risk. In this case, the Board of Adjustment granted variances to allow this subdivision to occur in September. Mr. Dempsey filed a request for a rehearing, which was heard this past Tuesday and unanimously denied. And today I've learned that a second abutter has also filed a request for rehearing. The request for rehearing certainly does not negate or in any way affect the action that the Board of Adjustment took in granting the variances, and legally this board certainly can go ahead and act upon the subdivision request. In a nutshell, there are two components to this proposal. And this proposal basically arises out of two people who were married and who are no longer married and own this piece of property jointly, and as part of a marriage dissolution, a divorce, the property has to be divided up. Here is
Bernie, do you
28 and
Bernie,
30.
just grab that
I'm
microphone
sorry.
with you. Thank you.
Thank you, John. This is 28 and 30 Dearborn. It is one large lot now with these dimensions. What is being proposed is to divide it in half so that this would be 28, this would be 30. At the same time, there is a lot line adjustment. This is Regan Electric property here. A lot line adjustment moving this line 11 feet in this direction. You'll note there's already a fence there, and the fence has been there for 20 years. And what we're trying to do is legitimize what the agreement was between Regan Electric and Brian Regan 20 years ago, which was to relocate this boundary line. A survey plan was drawn back then, however, nobody ever came before the board to finalize this lot line adjustment. So at the same time that we're dividing this lot in half, we're also doing this boundary line adjustment between these two parcels. That's pretty much it in a nutshell. If you have any questions regarding the plan, Chris Berry is here. I know Mr. Branzel has asked that you continue this or not act upon it or table it because he has now filed a request for rehearing with the ZBA. And I would like to reserve, if he has some objections to the subdivision, I certainly would reserve some time to respond to those. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Questions for the applicant? No, thank you.
Mr. Chairman, members of the board, my name is John P. McGee Jr. I'm here tonight representing, as Attorney Pilich said, Brian Regan and Regan Electric Company, Inc. Present for Regan Electric Company, Inc. is Joseph Regan, who is the president. I don't think I could add much to what Attorney Pilich has already said, except I can tell you I was there from the beginning. Attorney Pilich was not. And in any event, there are two distinct requests here, as Attorney Pilich pointed out. One of them, the lot line revision, goes back to 1994 when both Mr. Regan and Mrs. Regan agreed to the lot line revision with Regan Electric. And they did that. There was consideration actually given, which they received from Regan Electric Company, Inc. And the lot line adjustment that was contemplated actually makes it reasonable to get into the back door, which is really the main door used for the Regan Electric property. And if that lot line is not recognized, then the lot line is very close to the back door, and that's why Mr. and Mrs. Daniel Regan, 20 years ago, who were the owners of Regan Electric, wanted to have that lot line revision. In terms of the current desire on the subdivision, Mr. Regan supports that, and as was pointed out at the Board of Adjustment, Mr. Regan is agreeable to the subdivision. It would assist Mrs. Regan's attempt to stay in 30 Dearborn Street, which he certainly has no problem with. The parties are attempting to work that out, but if it remains one lot, then that might be very difficult for Mrs. Regan to maintain both houses. And it doesn't make sense to have two houses on one lot. It really is difficult, and it makes sense for that division to occur. And like Attorney Pilich, I would like to reserve the right to respond to any particular arguments raised by Mr. Dempsey or Mr. Branzel. And from everything I've seen, everything that Mr. Dempsey raised at the Board of Adjustment was, well, actually, everything that's been raised before you is something that was aggressively raised before the Board of Adjustment and rejected. So having said that, I'll just say that I have nothing further at this point. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I'll now open up the public hearing if there's anybody in the public wishing to speak to, for, or against the application.
Good evening, Chairman, members of the board. I'm Mike Branzel. I live at 39 Dearborn Street. And unfortunately, I don't have legal counsel here this evening, so I'll kind of do my best to kind of work my way through this. But ultimately, you know, I'm not completely against subdividing this property, and it makes sense in many ways. What I'm really against is the fact that this property has some serious outstanding violations. And all the violations that I've found have been in the city files that I went down and picked out. What didn't happen at the zoning board is that I wasn't unaware of that there is an ordinance, outstanding violations, 10.237, that states no variance or special exception may be granted for a premise on which outstanding violations of this ordinance exists, unless the effect of such variance or special exception would be to remedy all such violations. So, I guess, yeah, George, if you could pass those out. I've outlined 7 violations. We've got 30 Dearborn, which is built on city property, and it's actually outlined by the surveyor's drawings. We have a variance that was granted in 1984 for the Regans to tear down a barn and then build a single-family dwelling, which is 30. And they were given the variance that they had to apply because at the time it was a 20-foot setback. They were given, they had to follow an 8-foot setback. But this house is clearly built on city property. So not only was the 8 feet not recognized, but there's nothing there. It's right on the street. So that's an issue. When they filed for that variance back in '84, they had to submit a drawing of the parking spaces that they were going to create for this property. And I've submitted all of this in all the exhibits. They depict 5 parking spaces. There are no parking spaces. Never created. No follow-up there. And I think that's probably, one of my biggest concerns is, why am I even here tonight? I don't feel like it's my job to come out and point out these violations when they're in the city files. And they just haven't been dealt with. And I don't know for what reason. I don't know if maybe one party then left office and then the ball got dropped. I don't know. But it's really frustrating. Another violation. Going back to that '84 variance that they were granted to build that single-family dwelling, they show a garage. There's no garage. The garage has been renovated. It's got a door, a front door, and a window now. There's nothing on file. There's no approvals or permit for that. Fourth violation. 30 Dearborn is actually a 3-family, not a 2-family. Now keep in mind, I mentioned the 1984 variance that it made it a single family. Well, what happened in '91 was that Chief Building Inspector John Grattan found that they had 2 kitchens. So he gave them a note, and that's also in your exhibits. Said that you've got to either file for another variance or you got to turn it back into a single family. So they got approval for making it a 2-family. Only after being busted. Not the other way around. So, and then he also instructs them, if you're going to have a second unit, you're going to have to create another parking space and get a variance for that. No parking space, no variance. I've got pictures of the property. There's exposed utilities, which happen to be in the street. There's a sewer line, exposed sewer line. I work in the trades, and I can't see how that would pass any inspection, especially when you walk up to the house. It's the first thing you see. But probably my biggest concern is the retaining wall in front of 28. That is clearly on city property, in the road. And because no parking spaces were ever created for 28 or 30 behind the properties, all the parking primarily exists on the street. And it's made worse by the retaining wall, which is out in the street. And the reason why it is because it's to house the sewer line in order to tie into the city sewer, because there's actually ledge at the end of the street. So we have a retaining wall in the street, and there's been many problems with that, parking-related problems, and I have examples of that as well. And then my final point, which is, it's clearly the most serious one, and that is the fact that Sue had a brush fire at her property, and the fire trucks were called in, and they couldn't get down to the fire. And because there was a car, one of her renters was parked out in front of the retaining wall. And it was just a brush fire, but they were able to put it out with a garden hose. But it does raise the serious question of, can a fire truck really get down that street if it needs to? And I'm sure the Portsmouth Fire Department will do whatever it takes to get to a fire, but I'm sure every minute that is spent dealing with some of these things that are clearly not legal could potentially cost lives. So on the surface, splitting and subdividing this property, not a real big deal. But my problem is that we've got substantial violations for over 20 years. Noted. I'm not making these things up. And nothing's been done. And what I'm asking is, could somebody help make sure that these things get fixed? And that's what I briefly spoke to in front of the zoning board, but the chairman, who listened to what I have to say, said that that they weren't there to hear about prior violations. They were only there last month to hear about whoever wanted to speak to, for, or against subdividing the property. So I wasn't really even given a chance to get into this and explain that I really believe that, and if I'm reading this ordinance correctly, and maybe I'm wrong, but to the layperson, this says if you've got a violation, you shouldn't be able to get a variance until you fix that violation. And it just seems common sense to me. So if we can get these things fixed, then there's a good chance I could come up here and speak in favor of subdividing. But I have a feeling we're a long ways away from that. Are there any questions?
Any questions?
If you could just go through that document that I presented in the exhibits, it'll help explain what I didn't do right now.
Well, thank you.
It's not a question, it's just a comment. The material that was handed out doesn't have the cover sheet on it. I just wanted to read the cover sheet because it's from Mr. Branzel and says, please be advised a copy of my request for a rehearing of Zoning Board of Adjustments case 9-8 concerning Brian and Susan Regan, petitioners at 2830 Dearborn Street. I request you table the Regan's petition for a variance for subdivision application current on tonight's planning board agenda.
Okay. Thank you, by the way.
Good evening. My name is George Dempsey. I reside at 42 Dennett Street. The attorney, I'm not sure which one, it wasn't Bernie, but the other guy, made a comment that everything was raised at the Zoning Board of Adjustment. That's an incorrect statement. I did not raise everything. The violations were not allowed to be heard. Okay? So when somebody says, I did something, I did not. Okay? My words, not his. Most importantly, the day of the fire, I was there. Okay? The reason I was there is twofold. There's somebody on the street that's elderly that was very sick at the time. And my concern that both the people were elderly and so on and so on. So I was concerned for them. So I came over. My house is to the right, 3 houses over. When I got there, I saw the fire engine, and they could not get down the street. Okay? With that, what's in that written report is a life safety issue. That has been raised multiple times with people in this city, and they have not acknowledged that. I want you to think about that. That's not casual, saying a life safety issue. Fire truck could not get through to a fire. And I want you to hear something. A few days after the meeting, Miss Regan here drove by me and laughed about it. Okay? Just something to think about. That's all I have to say. Thank you. And by the way, I do appreciate your service. I really do. Thank you.
Other first-time speakers that would like to speak to, for, or against? Second-time speakers?
I'll be brief. You're the planning board. Your job is not code enforcement. City of Portsmouth has a code enforcement officer, and they have a legal department. In fact, the state statutes do not allow you to be the enforcers of the zoning ordinance. These issues all came before the Zoning Board of Adjustment also, and these are abutters who's apparently are not opposed to the subdivision, but are opposed to what's out there on the ground now. Well, the subdivision is an imaginary line that's going on the ground. That's all it is. Not a single thing is going to change. Apparently they are frustrated because they perceive that there are violations. By their own admission there 20 years ago. But because there were those violations 20 years ago, for some reason they feel that this board should somehow try to enforce or become the code enforcement officer. And that's not your job. That's not what the enabling legislation says a planning board is to do. That's why we have Jason Page, and that's why we have Bob Sullivan and Suzanne Woodward and all of the other legal department staff. They're the ones that enforce and bring people to the attention of the city if there are violations. In fact, we have online a complaint form telling you if you think your neighbor is doing something wrong or has done something, fill out this complaint, send it to Jason Page, and it'll be handled by the legal department. This is not what you're here for. You're here to act upon the subdivision. The subdivision was before the zoning board. The zoning board granted all of the requested variances so that this subdivision is now in order to go before this board. If there were violations, they may have been cured. I don't know. I have not been involved in this, but I'm sure Jack McGee's got some additional information for you because he's been involved from day one. But this board's job is not to become the code enforcement officer, and if they have complaints, they're bringing them to the wrong place. And that's what David Witham, the chairman of the ZBA, told them. It's not our job, and it's not the point. Bring your complaints to the code enforcement officer. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, members of the board, Jack McGee again, and a couple of comments. First of all, it seems as though Mr. Branzell doesn't object to the subdivision, but he's concerned about violations. In terms of the violations, I can't tell from what he submitted that there are any violations. There's nothing pending before the city as to these particular issues. And it is obvious that the city has known about these issues for 20 years plus, including the retaining wall. One thing about the retaining wall that I will make comment on, because I think Mr. Branzell has referred to it 3 times in his motion for rehearing, and that is he's saying that the Regans built into the city street. City property, I believe is what he used. And he's referring to the street. I'd like to say this about that. Dearborn Street is not laid out. Dearborn Street is an old path that was developed years, probably 200 years or more ago. There's nothing which says how wide Dearborn Street is. There's nothing which gives the city any rights to Dearborn Street from a dedication standpoint. Any rights that the public have to Dearborn Street were acquired through usage for well over 20 years. Mr. Regan tells me that in 1984 and before, there was no street where that retaining wall is. There's no pavement. There was nothing but a hillock or a little hill. And what he did is he took out that hill, which wasn't being used for passage, and he put in that retaining wall, and he had to put it where it was because public service wouldn't move their pole, which is probably more of an obstruction, or at least as much of an obstruction as the retaining wall. And you're all familiar with old streets and pathways and the uncertainty of distances. And if you aren't, all you have to do is go down Siri Street, and when you reach the Muffet Ladd property, you can see the uncertainty which exists as to how wide a city street is. So this retaining wall is not on this, if it's on this, it's not on the city street. The city street never occupied that area. And there's, as I said, no return of layout. I did want to check that with Mr. Berry, and he told me that's true. There is no layout of this street. So the city doesn't have any rights on Dearborn Street unless it was an area that was used. And it wasn't used. It was a little hill going up to the building. And if you look at the plans that Mr. Branzell submitted, it's clear that the Board of Adjustment back in 1991 or 1984 knew the 8-foot distance was from the retaining wall because that's what's shown on the plans. You'll also see a letter from Attorney Cuddy, I believe in the early 90s, about the retaining wall and talking about the uncertainty. The Regans told the city they weren't sure where the street layout was, and the city apparently didn't know either. And in 20 years, the city has made no claim that that retaining wall is on a street. And I would suggest that if a city street were being impacted, that the city, given all the complaints which have come around in that area in the last 20 years, would have acted by now. And I would suppose that the city's attorney's office recognizes that there's not much the city can do in this area. And perhaps if Public Service Company or whoever owns that pole would be approached, maybe something could be done to help out in that area. But as Attorney Peelich said, I'm going beyond, I think, what's necessary. The Board of Adjustment thoroughly considered these issues. There were no clear violations presented which could be substantiated. There's nothing in the files of the City Inspection Department which shows any violations currently exist. The Board of Adjustment made that determination when they voted these variances. From a technical standpoint, I'm also unsure just what Mr. Branzell is complaining about, and I want to be sure because there are two distinct issues here. One is a lot line relocation involving Regan Electric and the Brian and Susan Regan property, and the other is a subdivision of the basic Brian and Susan Regan property. It would appear that Mr. Branzell has filed a motion for hearing as to the subdivision application of Brian and Susan Regan, not Regan Electric. So I don't want Regan Electric Company to get mixed up in any fight over other issues that Mr. Branzell or Mr. Dempsey may have. That's number one. Number two, I still would strongly ask you to support this subdivision. It's gone through the Board of Adjustment. If, in fact, the Board of Adjustment should vote to rehear this, which I don't think they will, they've already turned down Mr. Dempsey unanimously, then, of course, your vote would have to be contingent on the Board of Adjustment, because if the Board of Adjustment's overturned, then your decision would automatically be mooted. So I thank you for your consideration. I'd ask you to grant this subdivision and to allow these people to be able to part and go their separate ways in peace, and to give Regan Electric the 15 feet that it bargained for 20 years ago. Thank you.
Thank you. The public hearing is still open, so we're looking for second-time speakers that would like to come up and speak to, for, or against.
Again, it would be nice to have legal counsel here to combat these guys. Exhibit 7 in your paperwork. You can read that letter, but I believe that is from Rick Hopley. And at the bottom it states this area is a third unit. That's a violation. That was, and both attorneys said that I presented this information before. No, I didn't. And I believe I don't know, you have minutes and stuff, so it could be reviewed to see, you know, what I exactly said, but I'm sure people could check that. Again, I've got documentation here. These are clear violations. And I just think that, I think these things should be addressed first. And it's untrue that I brought all these things up before the board. And you can check the minutes. Any discussion about this was cut off. One of the board members started to talk about the property 30 being in the road, and he was cut off. So that conversation didn't happen. So I think one of the things that's important about this document that I've prepared is it's a series of violations. We're not talking about like one here or one there. Neither attorney mentioned the fact that you know, they were zoned as a single family and then got busted for having a two-family and then got a variance. Didn't speak to that fact. That's a big deal. And to trivialize, you know, just subdividing this property, I think is an injustice. And I don't know why. You know, again, this seems to get overlooked. Outstanding violations, section 10.237. That's in the city ordinance. I would think that I would think that would be something that people would honor, and so kind of babbling at this point.
Thank you.
Any questions for me, or just statement? Thank you.
Oh. You can.
Can I address that?
You can.
A couple of those issues. First of all, there aren't any violations.
If we
Can
could
you
get
hear
your
me?
name and address, just.
Oh, I'm sorry. Susan Regan, 30 Dearborn Street.
Thank you.
First of all, there are no violations. I have no idea what he's talking about. First of all, Jason Page has been in my house, and he knows there are 2 kitchens. There are 2 units at 30 Dearborn Street. Number 2, as far as the fire engine not being able to get down the street, there are cars parked on the street when the garbage truck comes. He gets down the street. He goes all the way down the street. You know, everybody gets down the street. And I've been there for over 20 years, and that's never been a problem. I've only seen the fire department on my street once in 20 years, and it's never been a problem. So I just wanted to address that, because there is no third unit at 30 Dearborn Street, just 2 units.
Rick Hopley, there is a letter written by you listing a third unit. Is that correct? And you wrote that, please?
You talking about Exhibit 7?
I'm not sure what the number is on that. I don't have it in front of me. But you have it handwritten, violation on a third unit?
It's a log report. Do you know which file this came out of, 28 or 30? Because there's no address on it.
I couldn't tell you exactly, Rick. Sorry.
I mean, it was 2006,
Well,
so I
let's
don't
put
know.
it this way. If it's 28 or 30, what the hell is the difference? It's a violation. It's a third unit.
I'd like to know, there's been some talk about 30 and there's been some talk about 28, so I really wanted to know which building this was.
Oh, yeah, but in fairness, we're talking about both properties, so what difference does it make?
I guess it makes a difference because this was in 2006 and we're in 2011, and is it still there? I'd like to know which house
You
it
were
is.
just told it didn't exist.
Anyway.
Let's just stick to what your point is, please, so
Okay.
that we can get
Well,
through
no,
this.
I just not let
I understand
that
that.
slide by.
And
I want to go back to 2 things. Again, the attorney spoke and he said, I presented these things again. The violations were not presented. I wasn't allowed. Mike Brenzel was not allowed. A board member was not allowed. They violated your own rules. Give me a break. I mean, beat me up with something, but not your own rules. I'd appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you. Haven't seen second time speakers. I'll call third and final time. Speakers, 2 for or against. Seeing no one rise, I'll now close the public hearing. We are looking at, just to refresh the board, H and I. H is for the preliminary and final between Brian and Susan Regan and Regan Electric, and item I is Brian and Susan for preliminary and final for 28 and 30 Dearborn Street. Item H. Do I have a motion for item H? Yes, Ms. Hayden.
Well, I'll make a motion so we can have discussion here. I mean, obviously, it's a very complex little situation down there created by many interesting decisions and actions over many decades. I think, why don't I make a motion on A, B, and C?
From the memorandum you're talking.
Yeah,
Okay.
from the memorandum, which addresses all of them, which I think may help us in our discussion. I would make a motion that we postpone action on the waiver of the subdivision rules and regulations, that request, until the November Planning Board meeting, and the other items on the subdivisions themselves, item B and C in the Planning Board memo. I would make a motion that we grant preliminary subdivision and refer this matter back to the Technical Advisory Committee for their input, particularly on public safety, on the sewer infrastructure issues, the PSNH utility pole, and whatever other concerns they may have, and the wall, particularly as it relates to the sewer, so that we can have more information, and it will give the department time to, as Mr. Hopley said, just because we have lots of violation letters in files, but what we don't have in front of us tonight is how those violations may or may not have been addressed over the years. So I guess I'd also make that motion contingent on whatever the Board of Adjustment or court decides on this, because if we grant preliminary approval for both the lot line revision and the subdivision request, it may never get to final approval. But if we grant preliminary, it gives some indication that there's some interest in the board to move ahead with this, because we've heard some testimony in the record. People are concerned with the subdivision per se, but with other issues. That was a long motion.
Do I have a second? Second, Ms. Petna. Discussion on the motion. Councilor Spear.
I guess if the planning director could educate me in the process, how does the item A, the waiver of the subdivision rules and regulations, fit in with the variances that the Board of Adjustment does? Like, if we grant the waiver, why do they need the variances and vice versa?
We cannot grant, I'm sorry, you cannot grant a waiver. The purpose of the waiver is really for something that is a legal non-conforming structure or lot. So that in the cases we've had it before, it has been a lot where no new violation is being created. The structure or the lot existed before the zoning regulations applied. And the way our subdivision regulations read is that the board, that all lots must comply, all the dimensions must comply with the zoning ordinance. So, and I would incorporate that to say with the zoning ordinance as modified by variances. So if the board grants variances, you don't have to waive the dimensional regulations, but if there are pre-existing non-conforming issues that are there, you would need to waive those in order to do a subdivision approval. So I'm not sure that's clear. You have to look at each individual case, but I would say in the point that I raised was just in a quick review. The structure, I believe, at 30 clearly doesn't comply with our wetland setbacks. I don't have enough information to know whether it's, whether there was work done since our wetlands regulations were adopted. So I was suggesting that you would want to at least waive that setback requirement. And I think the waiver really doesn't mean that you're varying anything. You're just recognizing that there's something that exists there that is perhaps a lawful non-conforming situation as opposed to a violation. So the fact that you waive something doesn't make it legal. It just if it is legal, you're waiving it and recognizing it.
And then a question for the maker of the motion, trying to understand the motion. It's preliminary approval in the voting on preliminary approval tonight, or postponing it till November? I was a little bit confused on.
I'm sorry, my motion was not too clear, but basically to grant preliminary subdivision approval pending input from TAC on infrastructure, public safety issues.
I see. Okay.
Mr. Rice?
Oh, well, isn't that kind of putting the cart before the horse?
You referring to the TAC comment?
Exactly.
I think
I've got a number of
preliminary
things
is
that
just that, preliminary.
The number of things are kind of puzzling me here, as I'm sure they are with everybody here. But I'm wondering why you wouldn't want to have TAC approval first before you act, number one. Just you go ahead and give me a legal, not a legal, but I'm sure it's going to be.
Give you an opinion.
Yeah, an opinion, and I have some follow-up questions.
Okay. The reason that I said grant preliminary approval is because I don't think people are concerned with the subdivision or the lot line relocations per se. They're concerned about other things. The other option is, if the board prefers, we could just postpone all of these. I could revise my motion to postpone A, B, and C to the November meeting pending TAC approval and not grant any preliminary approval. But, the granting of preliminary subdivision approval, in my mind, is this. No one said, this is a really bad idea to move these lot lines around. What they said was, we're concerned about the wall, we're concerned about public safety issues, we're concerned about whether some violations may or may not exist. They don't really have to do with where we're moving the lines on these lots. That's why I was in favor of preliminary only. And if it never goes anywhere, if the Board of Adjustment votes differently, if any number of things may cause this board never to vote for final approval.
Mary Liz's hand is up.
No, you had further
Well, I had two other questions.
Well, why don't we finish up with the
Okay, all right. The other is, we're creating two non-conforming lots. And I just wanted to know, reading the memo, I still, at the end of the day, didn't come up with a compelling, couldn't read in a compelling reason to create two non-conforming lots. I know some emotional reasons why we might create two non-conforming lots, but I'm just wondering from a legal and a planning standpoint, what would be the compelling reasons? Just enlighten me on that.
Sorry. Well, I don't think we're creating two non-conforming lots. We already have lots of non-conformity down here, as I say. In fact, we don't even know what all the non-conformities are because, as Attorney McGee said, this is a really old part of town.
Right. I used to live there.
Right. And these things have evolved. So I think the planning director would say we're not creating new non-conforming lots. We have non-conformity
all over the...
And I would say that if the variances stand, they're granted, they're really conforming, because the variances, I believe you'd say that makes it conforming from that point of view. So it's, the Board of Adjustment has taken that action to say, okay, these dimensions in terms of lot area and frontage and setbacks are okay with us. We grant the variance. So up to at that point, that gives the planning board the opportunity to subdivide the lots, because it makes those lots essentially legal in terms of their size and dimensions. The question that's up in the air, I guess, is whether that's going to, because of all the appeals or requests for rehearing and so forth, whether that's going to stand. So clearly the board's action on it, whatever it would be pending that final determination, wherever that appeal process stops.
And the last question is probably not, as easily dealt with as the first two. Isn't it? It's my understanding that if there are violations against on a piece of land that the board cannot make deal with an application until those. Something along those lines. Just again, I'm going to need to be enlightened here.
The point that's been referred to in there's two separate provisions. In our zoning, it states that the Zoning Board of Adjustment may not grant a variance or a special exception for a property that has violations unless the effect of the variance or special exception is to remove all the violations, to address all the violations. That's the issue before the Board of Adjustment. That doesn't relate to the Planning Board. The Planning Board, the comparable regulation in the Planning Board's regulations is that the Planning Board, the lots to be created in a subdivision must comply with all requirements of the zoning ordinance, and then the Planning Board has the ability to waive that. So it's a little bit unique because the Planning Board, in essence, can waive its requirement that the lot dimensions comply with the zoning ordinance. But even if the Planning Board does that, it doesn't affect the Zoning Board's ability to grant a variance. So the Zoning Board, in order to grant a variance, must eliminate all the violations. You must address all the violations that exist on the property. It's kind of an odd situation, and that's the issue that Mr. Branzel was raising. But that's not properly before the Planning Board. If you see what I mean, it's really an issue for the Zoning Board. And
well,
I think
that's
it's
as
true.
clear as mud.
Yeah, it is unusual, but you don't. I think it's true that the Planning Board doesn't have zoning authority. It doesn't have the ability to enforce zoning ordinance. So that's the legal department in the Zoning Board.
Ms. Geffert, did you have a question?
I just have a statement, which is I actually care about this subdivision because once you create two lots from this one, you've got an absolute too close to the North Mill Pond right to build again, which you don't have if it's just one lot. And I'm talking about 30 and 28. I don't want to see these houses torn down, and I'm thinking, this is fine and historical, and if it weren't so close to a wetland, I'd be finer with it still and considering a lot that's smaller, but I don't think it's a good idea. And then just from a planning perspective, I understand that the Reagan Electric property is seeking to be slightly larger because of the location of the building, but we're creating an irregular lot. I mean, without that, it's sort of straight back to the pond from Dearborn. And with the change, it's a little jug handle or whatever. L.
In an ideal world, I would agree with you, but we are stuck with an unfortunate task here on October 20th, 2011, which is we have inherited the sins of the past. And the fact of the matter is there are two dwellings on that lot right now. And I guess we need to find the best way to come to some resolution on that. I agree. If it was a blank slate, completely different.
Just to respond to that, I obviously we're not going to ever be in a situation either as a municipality or as a zoning group to say take one of those down because there shouldn't be two. There are two there now. Okay, that gets grandfathered. If one of them falls down, it doesn't get to be rebuilt. I mean, I don't want to hurt the owners at all, but look, this is too close to water and it's too small a lot, and all of a sudden now we're going to say, okay, that's all right. I don't think saying that's all right is fine. I think we can't change history, so let it be. And they can, I hate to say this, but they can work out some sort of contractual arrangement so that there's some division of the property that's non-subdivision in nature. But that's me. We can agree.
No, I understand your point. Yeah. I do.
Mr. Blinken.
Can I just ask a process question based on Cindy's motion? At our November meeting, we would then have a report back from TAC, and then we would take action on final approval, potentially?
Potentially.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Thank you.
So, we have a motion and a second. We've had any further discussion on the motion?
Can I intercede, even though I just, one of the reasons for tabling obviously is to respond to new information, and I think there's been some new information presented tonight that you didn't have before tonight, and also I now have a question because the plan appears to show a 30-foot right-of-way on Dearborn Street, And yet we've had a comment from Attorney McGee that there isn't a 30-foot right-of-way. There's just that it kind of varies back and forth. So it seems to me that the testimony that's been presented tonight kind of contradicts the plan. And so I guess I'd want to be sure of that, because in this case, it shows that that the wall is in the city's right-of-way, and yet there's some question raised by one of the applicants about that. So I guess that's kind of another reason why you might want to postpone to get further clarification on that issue.
Ms. Hayden.
And do you see any issue with granting preliminary and still continuing to pursue that? And I'm interested in the thoughts of the board, too, because I'm open to revising my motion if that's the will of the board.
I don't see any issue with that. I think it moves it forward where it needs to go.
I don't have a clear opinion on that.
No, I think the board is satisfied with Mr. Hopley.
Just a question, a lot of the attention on the actual lot lines are of course, on the ones being created or shuffled. This plan does, though, also establish, I guess, what the front boundary is. And the front boundary on this plan clearly shows that wall and the accompanying utilities in not the owner's, in someone else's property, probably the city's. And maybe this is the first plan that's ever shown that on Dearborn Street. But we can, again, preliminary doesn't lock us into final.
Doesn't lock us into anything. I think it's a mechanism to move this forward, though, is my opinion. So, any other discussion on the motion? I'll call the vote. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed?
Me. I don't think it should go.
Ms. Gefford's opposed, and the chair votes aye. Don't forget, we have item I as well for the application of Brian and Susan Regan, and that is for 28 to 30 Dearborn Street, where they're asking for preliminary and final subdivision approval.
Well, then I have confused the world, because my intent was the way the planning department memo was written, A, B, and C cover both of those. Am I correct, Rick?
That's what you said.
Yeah. So your intent was to vote on both applications together.
H and I, right.
She postponed the waiver and voted H and I.
Right, and I think it's confusing because we have item B and C in the planning department memo. One relates to item H, one relates to item I. And my intent was to postpone both H and I to the November meeting pending input from TAC. Do we need any further clarification? Do we want to vote on it separately so it's clear for the record?
Mr. Blankenship.
I mean, while I understood Cindy's motion to be dealing with both, I think at a minimum we should make sure that everyone who voted understood that, or we should revote to make sure that we're taking action on both.
I think we should just re-vote on H and then vote on I, which we haven't yet voted on.
Okay.
Or is the board comfortable on the motion we made on application H?
I felt it was both, but if it's legality, then is it legal to vote on both our motion?
You can.
As long as that's what we understood.
I understood it as both.
Then what I would ask, I think it's appropriate, and you guys can chime in, that I'll indulge the board to ask for a vote that recognizes the vote we just made was for items H and I.
So moved.
And to restate the position, we're tabling, postponing, sorry, H and doing preliminary on I.
Oh, boy, this is
No,
definitely...
we should go through each one.
Yeah, we should.
And I would recommend that you vote A, B, and C here individually, under here. So, because A was meant to apply to both of them, and then B and C were each individual.
Right.
So then why don't we step back and we'll re-vote on application H. I have a motion to rescind the...
Actually, can I help? Because I think we have to do the one thing first, which is the waiver vote.
Right. I think we rescind the vote we just made on H, have a new vote on the waiver, then we'll vote on H. I think it's the process. So do we need a motion to rescind the previous?
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye. Aye.
Any opposed? And the chair votes. I must be getting credits towards my law degree.
You are like in.
Use
You've
or
already
something.
finished 2 years.
Ms. Hayden,
All
we're
right,
voting on item H.
Item H. On item H, I will make a motion that we postpone action on the waiver request of the subdivision rules and regulations. Do you want to vote on these individually within the item?
Yeah.
Would
I
that
think
be
we sh-
clear?
I think we
All right,
should.
let's do
Yes.
that. That's my motion.
Second.
Second, discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? And the chair votes aye. Still on item H.
Still on item H, I will make a motion that we postpone to the November Planning Board meeting.
No, Cindy, it was to grant preliminary approval. That's what you were saying before. Sorry.
You're so right.
What she
To
said.
grant preliminary approval with the stipulation that we refer this matter to TAC for a report back on sewer infrastructure issues, public safety issues, the public service pole, and that action will also be pending any further action by the Board of Adjustment and the court regarding this matter.
Second.
Second, discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Ms. Geffert? And the chair votes aye. That concludes application H.
It does.
Moving rapidly on to application I, which is for Brian and Susan for 28 and 30 Dearborn Street.
I'll make a motion that we postpone to the November meeting, action on the waiver request for the subdivision rules and regulations.
Second.
Second, discussion on the motion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? And the chair votes aye.
And I'll make a motion on item I that we grant preliminary approval and refer this matter to the Technical Advisory Committee for a report back on sewer infrastructure issues, public safety issues, the public service pole, and that action on this matter will be pending outcome of Board of Adjustment and any court action on this matter.
Second.
Second, discussion? I'll call the vote. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
Aye.
Ms. Geffert? And the chair votes aye.
Sausage has been made.
Thank you. Thank you for your patience, and I think we,
Apologize for my bad motion-making skills.
tough to follow the bouncing ball.
It was a perfect recovery, I thought.
We'll move on now to item J. I'm just going to clean my desk here a little bit. Item J, the application of Harbor Corp. LLC owner for property located off Deer Street, Green Street, Russell Street, Market Street, and Maplewood Avenue for a third one-year extension of site review approval, which was granted on October 16, 2008, for the construction of an 83,118 square foot, 6 to 7 story structure consisting of a hotel, convention center, parking garage, and 21 residential condominiums, with related paving, utilities, landscaping, drainage, and associated site improvements. Said property is shown on Assessor Plan 118 as Lot 28, Assessor Plan 119 as Lot 1-1A, Lot 1-1C, and Lot 4, Assessor Plan 124 as Lot 12, and Assessor Plan 125 as Lot 21, and lie within the Central Business A District, the Central Business B District, and the Downtown Overlay District, and the Historic District. Who's here tonight on behalf of the applicant?
I am, Mr. Chairman. My name is Malcolm McNeil. I'm an attorney from Dover, and I represent Harbor Corp. With me this evening is Dennis Moulton, who's passing you out some materials, as well as Chris Thompson, a principal at Harbor Corp., to my right. I've been involved in this project since 2005. Many of you sitting before me have not. Some of you have. We're here tonight seeking an extension because the developers wish to do this project, seeking it for no other reason. They have intended to do the project from the day that they started the approval process in December of 2005, and are only here because they wish to build the project as it was approved. There's only one reason why the project hasn't been approved, and that is they cannot obtain financing for this project, which will cost approximately $80 million to build. In today's credit environment, to borrow money in excess of $20 million under the present regulatory controls is next to impossible or extremely difficult. clients have been working on it since the date of approval. This project was significantly delayed by litigation brought by opponents to the project, arguably competitors to the project, both related to a parking garage that was going to be built in common with the city and the hotel itself, which resulted in final approvals being delayed until October of 2008. October of 2008 was the beginning of what some people call the real estate recession. I call it the real estate depression that we are presently in, which most directly influences the availability of credit and the willingness of lenders to lend money to anybody, let alone someone asking for $80 million. This is especially sensitive on the credit side due to new regulations, procedures, federal oversight as to any projects over $20 million. Now, this project, for reasons that I will indicate, is not severable or divisible, and as such, the applicant has been seeking financing since approval for the whole project, unlike other projects that have come to you in this area. They continue that process and believe that this project, which was an entire collaborative effort between the city and the applicant, continues to be in the best interests of the city. It's respectfully submitted to you. There is no downside to anyone by extending the approval of this project on the basis of the prior approvals. And there is absolutely no planning reason not to proceed with the granting of the extension solely linked to the original approvals. Now, in terms of the project, this project is one of the largest projects in the history of Portsmouth and was readily supported from the beginning by the city as a co-applicant. The Economic Development Committee supported the project, as did the city administration, the planning department, as well as an outside consultant who confirmed the desirability of the project and the economic benefits it would bring to Portsmouth. The plan is for a construction of an 83,118 square foot, 6 to 7 story structure consisting of a hotel, being a first-class Western hotel of 207 rooms, a large convention center with 19,000 square feet of flexible meeting space to accommodate 1,000 people at a seminar, a 7-level parking garage, which will now be private as a result of litigation, but will certainly be available to patrons, which will provide parking for over 657 cars, and 21 residential condominium units, as well as retail facilities on the first floor of the project. And for any of you who don't know, if you know where the Sheridan open parking area is, contiguous to where the Herald used to be, that's the basic slice of land that we're talking about. Now, the developer to date has expended $1,800,000 in soft costs for this project, including architectural fees, permitting fees, legal fees, engineering fees, etc. $1,800,000. The project had an extremely elongated approval process due to pressures from competitors, and somewhat due to the significant size of the project itself, which required approvals and cooperations at all levels of the municipal regulatory process. Am I on?
You're on.
Okay. I'd like to show you some views of this project, some of you who may not have seen it before. This is a view from Green Street toward the water side of the backside of the hotel area. This is the entry area at Russell and Deer Street. See the various architectural features, all of which were approved by the HDC, and the HDC has approved a third extension. In addition to the architectural features, there's a bridge to the existing Sheridan Hotel. The participants are the same in both projects. Here's another view up Russell Street, showing the Sheridan, showing the pedestrian bridge, showing components of the project. On the left are all the new components. This would be along Deer Street, across from the vacant parking area that exists presently, showing a portion of the parking garage, retail facilities on the first floor, convention facilities in this particular area contiguous to the hotel. This is the parking garage that went through considerable study for over 650 cars. The architecture was the subject of discussion with the HDC. It's admitted that there's only so much one can do with a parking garage, but that effort was clearly made in this case. And here's a view of the parking garage if you were at the Herald Building looking at the facility. In terms of the site itself, here's the Sheraton here. Here's the project as it wings its way around the roadway system. Here's the railroad to the rear, the Herald Building here, the vacant parking facility area here, and the Residence Inn. A great deal of study and process went into this approval because at every stage, everything we did was challenged by competitors to the project. But at every stage, the city stood behind us. The city and the developer was sued twice in this case, the city being a defendant that we supported. First, the issue was relative to the public nature of the garage, and it was found that public financing could not be utilized with regard to the garage, so as such, this will be a private garage. And secondly, another party sued the city and the developer. The case went all the way to the Supreme Court over issues relating to concerns about the project. I think the real issues were transparent in terms of an attempt just to stop the facility. When the case went to the Supreme Court, in addition to what I spoke to you about in terms of the expenditures that have been made in the development of the building, this is a direct quote from the Supreme Court when it rendered its decision. There was also evidence that the proposed project was in the public interest. For instance, there was evidence that the proposed facility would support 144,000 visitor days per year, create over 300 full and part-time jobs, and generate $700,000 in annual property tax payments and $16 million in local off-site spending. And all of that was supported as well by the city's consultant as this matter proceeded through the system. The project would also create 300 construction jobs as it is built. Now, as we went through the TAC process in 2011, the issue of traffic came forward. This project, in terms of traffic, was considered in contemplation of all anticipated projects in that area, just as any new projects that would come to Portsmouth, whether it be the project that may come forward across the street, whether it may be a project that's diagonally across the street. The usual and customary process, very familiar to all of you, is that that developer comes forward and brings forward his effects on the approved system. You don't go backwards, you go forward. Subsequent projects always consider existing projects and approved projects, and that's what we're ultimately asking for in this case in the context of the Planning Department's recommendation. As I indicated to you earlier, a third extension was requested before the Historic District Commission. That extension was granted by the Commission on October 5. We have appeared before the Technical Advisory Committee as required, but we had nothing new to submit. There are no plans. There are no changes to what we are doing. There are no buildings. There are no additional impacts. There are no changes. We are not creating any new traffic that we hadn't anticipated before. We are creating new parking in the downtown, a large convention center, larger and serviceable through to the whole city, conference rooms, function spaces, et cetera, that should be a magnet to tourism and commerce. As noted earlier to you, this project has not gone forward because it has been unable to obtain the necessary financing to complete an $80 million project. As I indicated to you, the project cannot be divided. The parking garage is essential to the conference center. The hotel rooms are essential to the conference center. The condominiums are essential to the commercial viability of the project, all of which was discussed, challenged, debated when we brought this project before the planning board before. Now, in terms of the comments that will follow from me, which are a bit different from what you usually hear from me, in seeking financing, it is absolutely essential, and perhaps Mr. Rice knows this the best, and the chairman may know it as well, others may not as well, but it is absolutely essential to present evidence to a lender that a project is in fact permitted and is ready to proceed, and that there are no discernible substantial loose ends which would affect the financing risk or increase risk in an already severely constricted credit market. A banker would say, well, do you have your permits? Can you go forward? Can you get a building permit? So despite our participation in the TAC process, we cannot agree to the conditions proposed by TAC or the planning director. And I'll specifically indicate the ones that we can't agree with. These are particularly conditions 1, 2, 4, and 5, which are in your packet. But let me cite perhaps the condition that is most difficult. It's this, and this became known to us on the first time at TAC approximately 2 weeks ago. It says the applicant shall make a fair share contribution to the city to fund a northern tier traffic impact study and improvement plan to be managed by the city. The cost of the study shall be allocated among the 3 major development projects currently under review by the city's land use boards. The Westin Hotel and Conference Center, which is not before you for consideration, it's before you for an extension. Lot 3 of the Port Walk development and Phase 3 of the 30 Maplewood Avenue development. The size, scope, and cost of the Northern Tier Traffic Impact Study and Improvement Plan is not defined, is totally unknown as to its content. The timing is uncertain, as well as the final result. It requires 3 competitors to work together or contribute to a study, all with differing interests. Rather than the usual and customary practice of each development presenting its own traffic plans, as to the Westin, and as was the case with the Westin, and as others should, and I surmise intend to do with regard to their own projects, there will now be a new approach which was certainly never contemplated at the time of the processing of this project. Condition number 1, entirely well-intended, perhaps, by the city, let's say it is well-intended, is absolutely the opposite of what is necessary to gain financing for this project. Why? It creates gross uncertainty as to whether the project will go forward at all. It creates the requirement of proceeding with an added layer of review, and also the potential of creating issues for litigation, because as the plan changes, it creates the opportunity for litigants to raise issues as to any modifications, which in fact occurred in this case, which would further delay the project if the project is revised, and if there are public hearings that result in an ability to claim that the project has been modified enough to result in further dilatory appeals. Now, conditions 4 and 5 are basically these. The applicant shall revise the plans for traffic and parking modifications to incorporate recommendations of the Northern Tier Traffic Study and Improvement Plan. It is very realistic for me to indicate to you we haven't a clue what that means or what the substance of it could be. Then it goes on to say the project shall be reviewed by the Parking and Traffic Safety Committee. So in terms of those recommendations, they create uncertainty where uncertainty need not exist as to this project, and it creates the likelihood of delay and the likelihood that financing will never get obtained. The most likely method for the system to obtain, for the city to obtain the benefits of this project will be to extend the project on the basis of the original approvals. And I have the original approval, that's what I passed to you, with the deletion of requiring compliance with 2011 site review regs. The original approvals have not deterred subsequent developers to invest in this part of the city, and it should not deter prospective developers to go ahead in the context of the usual development process of planning around existing approvals. The city is protected by the approvals that have already been granted. The 2010 approval requires further action regarding sidewalks, drainage, lighting plans, landscape plans, all of which the city has reserved the right to review, and which would happen under the prior approvals. It wouldn't result in the movement of buildings. It wouldn't result in a finding that we have to have 100 more parking spaces. But in terms of what is a protective device, it is there in the 2010 extension. I might also add that the people who are behind this project are the people who did the Sheraton. They took a chance with the Sheraton a number of years ago, and in my view, I'm biased, played a major role in the development of this part of the city. They'd like to do it again. Everybody in the city worked diligently to move this project forward, but for the litigation, the recession, and restricted financing, the project would be built now. It is not unreasonable to say that most of the delays have been totally beyond the control of the developer. But this developer can't agree to an extension condition which, from its experience in the financial markets, will kill the project. In other words, the developer cannot write its own obituary. If you wish to announce its death, that's your prerogative. But we cannot approve a condition that will kill the project. We ask the planning board and the city to continue to be a partner in this project and to provide the conditions that will facilitate the ability to build it. The conditions proposed by the planning director will have the entire opposite effect. The conditions we propose provide an opportunity for the project to succeed, but also with controls that the city can exercise. We propose once against this project should be extended based on the original approvals. If you wish to revert back to the approval in 2010, which is what I'm asking to do, I just like a deletion of the provision that relates to the site plan regulations. Now, the planning director has also brought up the issue of the fact that we're requesting two waivers. One is to request a waiver that we didn't have to file full-size plans. This is the third time we've come forward for a request for an extension. The plans haven't changed once in 3 years. And so I would hope you would find that there's absolutely no reason to come in with full-size plans when there has been no changes. We're also requesting a waiver for the time deadline for submission and action on the waiver request. This was not an issue before the HDC because the HDC has different rules. Both of the extension requests were filed at basically the same time. Your regulations provide that an extension may be granted if requested and acted upon prior to the expiration date. The extension was certainly requested prior to the expiration date of October 14th and October 15th, because that's subdivision and site review that we're asking the extension for. But due to scheduling and filing requirements, the request for an extension of the subdivision approval, which involves the exchange of various parcels with the city, will be 4 days late, and the site review would be 5 days late. And we're asking for a waiver so that the approval of the extension will revert back those 4 or 5 days. Now, the planning director in his memo is concerned about precedent. As one who's in the precedent business, I'd like to suggest to you that a precedent always involves a consideration of the likeness of the projects being considered. We believe that this project is absolutely unique and should stand on its own merits with regard to the extension request. It is a huge project with significant benefits to the city that involved a collaborative effort by the city and will result in a large-scale beneficial return that is readily distinguishable from other projects that may seek similar relief. There really is no other project like this one in terms of size, scope, and impact, and that should be the criteria, and other requests should be considered on their own merits. I don't think there's an apples to apples type of project mix that is commensurate with what we're proposing. So usually when I come before you, there's been discussion with the planning director and all members of the staff, and we work out the terms of conditions, and I usually stand up here and say, those conditions look great, let's go forward. 2 weeks ago, we found out that some of these components that I'm speaking to you about would be the recommendation of the planning director who's doing his job, but I'm standing before you because we can't agree to it. Just can't. And if the city of Portsmouth wishes to have this project go forward, and we hope that you do, we ask you to provide us with the ability to have an approval that we can continue to try and bring to banks, and hope that the economy will improve and that financing will be advanced and that we'll be able to proceed forward. We just can't agree to a condition relating to traffic and the other concerns that will kill the project in terms of financing. Now, the final thing I'd like to say, and I appreciate your patience and attention because I've noted it as I've looked around. This is no small matter. When a taxpayer in this city spends almost $2 million to try and process approvals and takes defense cases at the Supreme Court and tries to bring a project to the community that everyone would be proud of, it's uncomfortable to be standing here. No one regrets standing here more than us, because we would rather be cutting a ribbon than asking for an extension. So what we would appreciate is realistically the opportunity to still achieve what this city readily supported and be able to continue to try and do this project. And the specific request is that the 2010 approval that is before you be the basis of the extension subsequent to the deletion of the reference to the site review language, and that the waiver be granted with regard to our being 4 and 5 days late with regard to the project filing date. Mr. Thompson is here, who could speak more fully to the financing component of this if you have questions. And Dennis Moulton is here with regard to the project. I don't think it can be underestimated, and I know Mr. Tainter was not here at the time, and I'm just trying to remember, I know Cindy was, and I think Richard was, but no one can underestimate the amount of work that went in to try and do this. And in all candor, we'd just like to have a further chance to do it. Be happy to answer any questions.
Question,
Mr. Blenkinsop?
I had a couple, if that's okay.
Absolutely.
My first question, Attorney McNeil, is just, can you help me understand, obviously, you and your clients know these rules well, and so in terms of the waiver you're requesting on the timeliness issue, why was, you must have realized at the time you submitted it, I think you did, you pointed out that it wouldn't be considered by the deadline, so why was it submitted late?
We presumed erroneously that the same rules would apply to the HDC submission as the planning board submission.
Okay. The second question, I guess,
we in candor, blew it. So in terms of as soon as we became aware, we filed as quickly as we could. The upshot is that the planning board only meets at certain intervals. There's advanced dates that are necessary. So we're 4 or 5 days late.
So it was just an innocent mistake, or?
It's an innocent mistake.
Okay. In terms of, one of the concerns I guess I have, or just want to get your thoughts on, is at what point, recognizing that we're moving years away from the underlying approval, and recognizing that at least if you believe some people, the economy isn't going to be better a year from now or 2 years from now, at what point?
I think
at what point does it get appropriate to say we need to look at these issues again because what was approved X number of years ago is no longer reasonable to just keep extending it?
I've discussed this a little bit with the planning director. Portsmouth is not the only place I practice. There are many communities that have no time limits on permits. And the philosophy is, as long as one is either vested in or vested out, they may proceed with the project. Portsmouth has a renewal process. I'm not going to criticize it or praise it in terms of having to come back. But there are numerous projects that I have done in this period of time that have been subject, you may be familiar with this, with extensions in state statutes with regard to expanding the time to vest a project. It used to be 1 year, it's been extended to 3. Substantial completion dates have been extended in terms of vesting. So if this were the type of project where we could have started to get into that vesting cycle, rather than it being this huge conglomeration that needs to go forward as kind of a unit, the case will come forward sometime that says, if you're vested under state law, can the city of Portsmouth tell you you can't go forward with your permit? But that's for another day. So in terms of how far out you go, I would say we're getting close to the end. Okay, but we don't wish to have the end be now.
Thank you.
Ms. Hayden?
What was the year of the first approval, Malcolm? And then, related to that, my second question while you're looking for dates is...
Let me give you a little bit of history. The application was filed in December of 2005. The project was approved by the HDC. Now, the initial filing, just to give you a sense of the scope of review, was December 2005. February 2007, the project was approved by the HDC. June of 2007, subdivision and site review approval were granted. Shortly thereafter, there was a minor change in the subdivision because of some street issues that had to be changed in August. 2007, litigation occurred. Litigation with regard to whether the parking garage could be public, and litigation brought by an alleged abutter to this project with regard to the basic terms of the approval. In August of 2008, the parking garage was found not to be permitted to be public, and we indicated it would be private. In August of 2008, we came back before the board to indicate the change from public to private and that was approved. In October of 2008, the Supreme Court litigation concluded in our favor. And shortly thereafter, the city attorney concluded that all time periods for the project wouldn't start to run until that period, because until the termination of the litigation, we could not go forward with the project.
So that date was late 2008.
Late 2008. And amended site review approval after all the litigation had concluded was October of 2008. So thereafter, the first time we requested an extension was August of 2009, and it's come forward from then. Okay, so we've had two previous extensions. Now, from my experience, and I know some people in this room work in real estate, this was just the beginning at that time. One might suggest that any challenges to this project were very well timed in terms of bumping the project into a period of time where financing and construction of a project of this size would become extremely difficult, and that is what has occurred.
Thank you.
Councilor Spear.
Can I ask about the concerns you have with some of the stipulations that the planning director, you mentioned items 1, 4, and 5.
Yes.
Is that right?
Primarily, yes.
Item 1, if you remove items 4 and 5, item 1 seems rather innocuous because it doesn't have any conditions. It's simply, I mean, in terms of, from a permitting standpoint, you help fund a study, but you would still proceed with your project.
Well, I'm not sure that's what it means. If Mr. Tainter is going to represent to you that if we...
I should ask Mr. Tainter then, I guess.
Okay. If Mr. Tainter, and that's one of the problems here because we really haven't figured out what this means. If Mr. Tainter is saying that the developer writes a check and no matter what the study says, this project still can go forward, but I don't think he's saying that.
Well, I think, first of all, I think you'd mentioned 1, 2, 4, and 5 as your objections. And I'd just like to separate those a little bit. 5 is in the existing approval, so that's not changed from the existing approval.
The issue for me is it's in the context of the study.
Okay, I understand it.
That,
so if, if I back out, if the study weren't there, 5 would not be an issue for you because it's the same as the existing.
It would be a lesser issue.
Well, would it be an issue?
I don't think it would be.
It's in the existing approval.
I don't think it would be.
And 2 is the only difference between 2 and what's in the existing approvals, I believe. Well, partially it's a relation to site plan. The existing approvals relate to current site plan review regulations, and that's one thing you're wishing to roll back to
because
to before last year.
I presumed initially when this was done, when the approval was granted, and we've commented about this approval being unusual, but it was unusual because it had the support of the city and the desire to go forward. I felt that provision related to the site plan regs at the time. Okay? And similarly, because in the extension that occurred last year, you went on to say, however, it is the understanding that this project as approved on October 16th remains subject to the standards of the zoning ordinance in effect on that date.
Yes.
So what I'm seeking is a meshing of those controls.
And I recall the discussion last year as saying we would go with the new site plan review regulations, but the old zoning ordinance, and that's exactly why that was written that way. And maybe you didn't understand it. We actually had that discussion about that at the time. At least here we did. But
I'm sorry to say I don't remember it. Yeah. And I might make this comment. As comparing the traffic presumed impacts with the site review, we've done a bit of an analysis with regard to the site review impacts. We're less concerned about it, but we're not certain, such as archaeological considerations and other matters that were certainly not the subject matter of what we did before.
So going to the traffic study, which is your question, the intent, the issue that we had when we were discussing this attack is that a lot has changed in the time period in the environment downtown. There's more development in that area. I think there are one of the issues, as noted in the regulations regarding time extensions says the planning board should consider whether there are any changes that materially affect the currently approved site plan in regard to traffic flow, volume, or congestion, zoning compliance, design standards, and so forth. So it was basically raising the issue that there are there have been more developments since then, and there are several developments that have been recently approved or that have been completed, as well as others that are in active consideration by land use boards. And my concern, and the concern I think was shared by TAC, was that it doesn't make any sense, knowing what we know about the downtown, to pretend that this is occurring in isolation, and pretend that Portwalk is happening in isolation, and pretend that 30 Maplewood is happening in isolation. That we should be looking at a downtown plan. So number one was to say we need to look at an overall level at traffic planning in the downtown. Now, whether that happens by a contribution from the developers, which is what's proposed by item 1, or whether it happens by some type of appropriation by the city without a developer contribution, really is a policy matter that's left to others, the planning board, city council, and so forth. But I really feel that that's necessary at this point, that we need to take an overall look at the traffic planning and circulation in the downtown as we're seeing all of these developments. Some of them are coming to fruition. Some, like this one, may take a few years to get to fruition. But we need to look at this. We can't pretend that the Westin Hotel is the only thing in the block, when we're looking at this. And again, so what I was considering in terms of this item number 1 was that we need to do a traffic study and come up with a plan for circulation in the downtown. The second step of that would have been what is in item number 4, which is to look at incorporating any results. Now, I can see the issue that you raise about that you prefer not to change your traffic improvements. I can envision a situation where the traffic improvements that you've committed to don't make any sense. They don't make sense to do. Maybe the angle parking on Deer Street. It may be something about the signal at Russell and Market. I don't know. I certainly can see that it might not make sense to have the double driveways coming out onto Maplewood the way they're configured right now. But we can move ahead with the traffic plans that you have, and then come back later and say, well, we have to redo stuff. I'm just not sure that's the most efficient way to do things.
The comment I'd like to make, Mr. Tainer and board members, is this. This project went through an excruciating review process. Subsequent projects will come forward and plan around this project. That's the way development is done. The only complicating factor here has been the delay in this project going forward. I have been involved in numerous circumstances where one shopping center gets completed and I come back a year later and propose a shopping center across the street. The shopping center across the street has to factor in the shopping center that was approved previously and consider all of the safety considerations that are provoked by it and other situations. So we regret having to be here, but in terms of the usual planning process, with the requirement that we have to go back to public safety anyway, place yourself in the position of the developer. This study that you're proposing is entirely uncertain as to its content, timing, cost, and results. And then the proposal is, then the applicant shall revise the plan for traffic and parking modifications to incorporate the proposals of this unnamed study. Now the problem for us is, if we are lucky enough to walk into a bank 2 months from now and say, our project has been extended, but just wait a minute, there's a loose end here. And that is, we have to wait for an unknown period of time for a study that we don't control, but only pay a fee for. And when it's done, we may have to change the whole project. So that's the realistic dilemma. Now, if this were a approval that didn't give you continuing control that you've commented about this approval being unusual in terms of your looking at the landscaping and other components that may involve city officials, if this were a one-pager without complexity, it would be one thing. But the city covered itself in terms of a review process for this project. And all I'm suggesting to you, all I'm suggesting to you is that practicality needs to come forward with regard to this without being critical to your proposal. And all I'm suggesting to you is there's a choice to be made here. If we could have agreed with your proposal and come in here and done that like we've done in the past, we would have. But we know what the result would be. If the planning board determines that it does not want to have this project, there are two ways of doing it. One is to approve Mr. Tainter's recommendations. The other is to turn it down. If the city wishes to have this project or to consider having this project, we would respectfully request that you consider the approval last year and give us an opportunity. And I'm not here for any other reason than to express the reality of the circumstances.
Councilor Spear and then Ms. Hayden.
I'll ask the planning director, what is the difference between your item 4 and the item 12 from last year's memo, which says the applicant shall revise its plans for traffic and parking modifications to recognize changes in existing conditions in the public and private streets surrounding the site? And they seem similar at first blush.
They are not. The condition from last year, first of all, you have to understand, I'm sorry, the as I've mentioned, many things were left unresolved in the original application. I think this application was, recognizing that a lot of review took place, this is a very open-ended approval with many things that have to be done in the future. And what happened was, at some point, that there were things had changed. There were two sets of traffic studies. There was one initial traffic study and then a subsequent revision to the traffic study. And I believe that what happened was that there had been changes in the local road system, perhaps the intersection of Deer and Market is one example, that didn't quite line up with the details of the traffic improvement plan that came out of the site plan. So really, I think that was really looking at small details of the off-site improvements that were required and approved in the 2008 approval. I think it had to do with the interim of the legal issues that came up with the project.
It's qualitatively different from
it's very
what
different.
could happen after the study that's being proposed.
So in other words, it wasn't a significant change from angle parking to parallel parking perhaps, but it was where the parking spaces were, the last 3 parking spaces or something like that.
Ms. Hayden?
Let's move off traffic for a minute. If I understood you correctly, you said item 2 was also of concern, and I'm trying to understand that one, because normally when we approve a site plan, we always have a landscaping plan, signage plan, lighting plan, drainage plan. So why is there concern with those?
Well, in the first instance, there's already provision for that kind of review in the 2010 approval. Okay.
So how is... So why would you have
the concern that we have is there have been revisions to the site review regulations. We've done a preliminary study. We haven't completed the study. We're concerned that there may be provisions that have a significant effect. Dennis can speak to some of the work that he's done, but we haven't completed that process.
Okay, thanks.
Could I say something also
Yes.
about that? One significant difference between the current TAC recommended stipulations and the previous ones is that the current proposed stipulations intend to move the project forward. So it says it's trying to put a timeline on this rather than continually saying sometime in the future we'll resolve what the site plan issues are. We want to get it done before the next extension.
You noted that I did not express concern with regard to that. We could talk about some timelines for some of the loose ends, and you had provided for some of that to be done in the spring and early summer of next year.
Any other questions for the applicant? Mr. Patno.
Is the bottom line that you need the waiver and the extension in order to get sufficient financing to make this stellar project go forward?
Yes.
Okay. Thanks.
Other questions for the applicant before we open up the public hearing? No? Thank you.
Thank you.
I'll now open the public hearing. Does anybody wishing to speak to, for, or against the application? Second time? Third and final time, seeing no one rise, I'll now close the public hearing.
Procedurally, are we to vote first on the proposed extension of the deadline, and then on on the waiver first, and then on the extension?
Yes,
Okay.
waiver first and then the extension, correct, Rick?
Yes.
Thank you.
I'll make a motion to grant the waivers.
Second.
Both the requirement for submission of full-size plans and the deadline for submission and action on a waiver request.
Second discussion? Mr. Blenkinsop and then Ms. Hayden.
Yeah, I do just want to say something about it. I don't have an issue with the full-size plans at all. On the time period, I just want to say for the record, I will vote in favor, but I want to say why I'll vote in favor just because of the precedent issue that Rick raised. And that's two things. Attorney McNeil represented on the record that it was an innocent mistake, and I believe that, so that's part of it. But secondly, important to me is that the request came in before the plan expired. So that's an important factor to me, that it didn't come, the request was made before it expired as opposed to after.
Okay. Ms. Hayden?
I won't be supporting this motion. I think that I think Mr. McNeil, Attorney McNeil, made some very good points, but I think granting this takes tremendous planning control away from the planning board. It's no small thing to roll back to earlier site review regs. Anybody else that comes in the door and asks for this, we are going to have a very difficult time saying no. If they are back here a year from now asking for another extension, we're going to have a very difficult time saying, sure, you can have another extension, and then the next year another extension. It's been 3 years since all the litigation was resolved, 6 years since this was originally approved. Most of the board members sitting here tonight have never reviewed this project, and they're even resisting having a full set of plans in front of us. And I have a hard time with that. I think we have a responsibility to review this project as a planning board. The landscape has changed in downtown dramatically in so many ways, and to just say, sure, another year's extension, I just can't support it for those reasons.
Okay. Councilor Spear?
I'm going to agree with the Deputy City Manager on 2 counts. Not only has, she's mentioned the landscape has changed in the downtown, but our own site review plans have changed and our zoning regulations have changed. And I think as we move further forward in time, the situation that this was approved in becomes more and more out of date in both of those circumstances. And so I'd like to vote against it for that reason.
Ms. Hayden?
And let me add, since I sounded so adamant about this, I'm not against this project. And I think it's false argument to say if we vote in a certain way that we're against this project. I really think we have a responsibility in our downtown to plan very carefully. And things have changed just so much that I'm not against the project by any means. I heard Malcolm very clearly about financing concerns. I took that into consideration, but again, we will have open-ended site plan approvals forever if we continue this. This is multiple extensions. So those are my concerns. I want to be really clear. I am not against this project in any way.
Other board members that would like to chime in?
Just a quick,
Mr.
this
Hopley?
first vote is on the waiver only and not the extension, is that correct?
It's on the waiver only.
Okay.
Ms. Roberts?
Yes, I'd just like to say I would agree with Deputy City Manager Hayden. I'm concerned about this because of the scale of this project. As she indicated, the nature and the scale of the changes that we've seen in the past few years really necessitate taking another look, as well as the concern about ongoing precedent that this would set. You know, we work hard to, I think, have these kind of regulations in place. And as much as I understand innocent mistake, you know, we need to have plans submitted on time and in the way that we require in our regulations.
I, too, am not going to support the motion. I'm as pro-development as anybody. I think Attorney McNeil said something that kind of rang true, is that to me, this project 3 years ago was the first shopping center. I think now it's the second shopping center. I think just a lot has changed. The precedent set, I'm a big believer in black and white. I don't like to debate gray. Somebody else comes in a year from now and says, well, it's only 5-6 days late. Does it become 8? I think that weakens our time frame to say you have to submit in a certain time period. So I, too, support this project. I supported it when it came along. I just think now, it's that other shopping center in my mind that, so anyway, that's just my comment. So if anybody else has any other comments? And the motion again is, just so we're all clear?
Waiver.
Grant just for the waiver.
Just for the waiver, correct?
We'll take up item B.
Right.
And we need 6 to do
And
it.
maybe we should read back what the waiver was, what the motion was, because it was a motion to grant the waiver.
Correct, that's right. I just wanted to be clear on, and do we want to read the waiver in again?
Probably a good idea. I think it was Norm's motion.
Was it your?
I thought it was.
It's my motion.
I'm sorry.
I can do it. It was a motion to grant the waiver, 2 waivers, requirements for submission of full-size plans, and the deadline for submission and action on a waiver request.
So,
Need a roll call.
I'm almost,
Probably need a roll call.
thank you. I was just going to say,
Oh,
I'd
sorry.
like to do a roll call. Mr. Blenkinsop?
So I vote in favor of the
In
motion.
favor? Okay, Mr. Rice?
Vote against the motion.
Okay, Ms. Roberts?
No.
Mr.
In
Hopper?
favor.
In favor?
No.
Mr. Patnow?
Yes. In favor.
Okay. Mr. Gladhill?
Yes, in favor.
Mr. Spear?
No.
Ms. Geffert?
I'll vote yes for the waiver.
Okay, and the chairman votes no.
What is that? Maybe just raise our hands.
Show of hands who voted in favor.
Wait,
It's not enough.
I think it failed.
he's alternate.
5 in favor? Yeah, no, it didn't pass.
It failed. Correct.
So then the others die.
Right, so then the other's a moot point on that.
We have to vote on this.
Oh, correct,
Yeah,
I'm
I think
sorry.
we should.
Ms. Hayden?
Just to make it clear, as recommended in the Planning Department memo, if the waivers are not granted, I'll make a motion to find that the site plan approval granted on October 16th, 2008, and most recently extended on October 15th, 2010, has expired.
Second.
Second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
No.
Mr. Patnow is opposed and the chair votes aye. Thank you. And that was the last vote, correct?
Wow. Tough procedural night.
earning our CEUs.
Exactly.
I think we have one other public hearing left, and that's thank you, board, by the way, for the input, the comments, everybody's attention. The application of 180 International LLC applicant for property located at 180 International Drive, requesting amended site plan approval for parking lot expansion to add 31 new parking spaces with related paving, utilities, lighting, landscaping, drainage, and associated site improvements. Said property is shown on Assessor Plan 312 as Lot 3 and lies within the PDA Industrial District. Who's here tonight on behalf of the applicant?
I am. My name is William Davidson from Hoyle Tanner. I'm representing 180 International. Basically, this is a small site plan that we are adding 31 parking spaces to. We did meet with TAC as well as respond to comments from the PDA. So I think everybody has plans, but basically we have three small areas that we are adding parking, one handicap stall, and there was a request to have closed drainage tied into the detention basin that exists. That's really the extent of the proposal that we have. We did respond to all of the TAC and PDA comments.
I'd just like to recognize Maria Stoll from the PDA's here too, so I did want to recognize Maria, so.
Sure,
If
thank you.
there are, does that conclude your presentation?
Yes, that's basically it, unless there's questions.
Any questions for the applicant? Ms. Hayden?
Just so the board is clear, the plans that were sitting in front of your spot when you came in are the ones that you want to look at. The ones that were in your packet are old news.
Should have an October 17th date stamp on the front page. Those are the most recent.
A couple of things, and it's a question, I guess, it's probably a question for Mr. Davison, but maybe for Maria also. I'm not sure you got my message earlier this evening. One of the things that was submitted, was requested to be submitted, was an as-built landscaping plan to compare it with the approved landscaping plan. And I did that and compared it with the proposed. And one thing I discovered, was that there are 11 more parking spaces in the existing conditions than on the approved plan. There's a section of parking in the back of the site that wasn't on the approved plan. I'm wondering whether there was an administrative approval that just never went through the city, if anybody can tell me that, because the whole, behind the building, starting at the back of the building, on the approved plan, the parking spaces end at the back of the building, and in the existing conditions, there are 11 more parking spaces before you get to the 4 new ones. So I'm just wondering whether there could be any clarification about how that happened.
I believe you're talking in this area
Yes.
here.
Yep.
I believe that one of the PDA regulations, and I may be wrong, is that there's an ability to have, I think it's 8 parking spaces expanded without formal approval. And I think that that's what's happened, and then I think that 11 were actually built instead of the 8. I believe that's what happened.
Could we have clarification on that?
Sure.
Maria Stoll from the Peace Development Authority, and yes, it is, as Bill explained to you. We use that because I think you may have changed your rules recently on what can be done without full site plan approval, but we were kind of mimicking what the city used to do with that 8 parking spaces. And so we had talked about that. We were aware that the applicant was going to build 8 spaces. Can't really explain how it turned out to be 11, but they did include those 11 spaces in their drainage calcs for this time and in the approval, so everything is kind of bundled into this approval tonight.
And my second question, going to the landscaping plan, or what I noted in doing the comparison was that on the 16 space addition, it looks like they're proposing to remove 3 trees and replace 4, so getting a net addition of 1. On the 13 space addition to the left front of the building, I couldn't tell from the as-built. There were three approved trees on the approved plan. It looks to me like those trees were never placed there, but now we're expanding that parking area back, and I'm wondering whether this is an appropriate time to place trees there, because you're going to have parking spaces and to have some shading of the parking spaces as you do in the other places where there are parking spaces, rather than have it, because it appears to me, and I'm sorry, none of the rest of the board can see this, because I only have the one copy of this plan. The existing condition, it appears, is a driveway with no trees beside it. Now you're changing that to parking spaces, and it might seem like it'd be a good time to follow the original plan and put some trees in around those parking spaces to kind of soften the edge there and provide some shade. I wonder if you had any comment on that.
I would agree with that, and I think that's why it was a good thing to bring up the landscaping plan again, so that we could all take a look at it. So
and I guess along the same lines, where those 11 spaces were added, there were supposed to have been 2 trees, and those trees apparently were never put in, or maybe they were taken out to put the 11 spaces in. I'm not sure which. Seems like that would be a good place to put additional trees in. And I guess what I would suggest as a stipulation is that adding to the stipulation that a revised landscape plan be presented and reviewed by the Planning Department and the Pease Development Authority as part of this, before the plan is finalized. And I guess that's that's relating to landscaping. That's what I would suggest.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Then there's also the issue of the applicant did address all the stipulations, but he didn't mention that he didn't agree with one of them, which is the stipulation about the area drain by the new parking spaces. And the Pease Development Authority had recommended that the drain be relocated back and the area be regraded, and the applicant said, we don't agree with that. I wonder if you had any further thoughts on that, Maria.
Hearing no further comment from the TAC or the folks for Public Works who look over that, I guess I would go along with their view of that catch basin, so I wouldn't push that any further.
Okay. Thank you. Great. Thank you, Maria. Questions for the applicant? Other questions? No? I'll now open up the public hearing. If there's anybody in the public wishing to speak to or against the application. Second time, third and final time, seeing no one rise, I'll now close the public hearing. Ms. Hayden.
I just have a question for Mr. Planning Director. So I didn't quite understand the last bit about the drainage.
There was a concern raised by the PDA that there's an existing drain in the lawn next to the driveway. The parking spaces, the new parking spaces are going to be moved right up against that drain, and there was a concern that in the winter you might have freezing and water. There was not
snow
enough,
piled on it.
well, it's not so much that, as that there wasn't enough of a grade, there was no grade separation between the rim of the drain and the top of the sidewalk, so it's concerned that water would basically bypass the drain, flow over the sidewalk and into the parking spaces and creates a freezing condition. And I guess there was discussion about that, and it is now long. It didn't get to the TAC because it just came in as a revised thing this week.
So the applicant doesn't want to change it, and am I correct in thinking that the PDA is okay with it as the applicant is proposing it? Then
Actually, the engineer, the applicant's engineer and I talked about it today, and as I understand it, the catch basin is not directly adjacent to the sidewalk. There is a few feet of grass in between, so it's not the problem that I thought it was. And upon hearing no other comments from Public Works, I think they must have looked at it and not had a comment on it. So yeah, I would agree with that it's okay
neither
the way
you
it is.
nor the engineer for the applicant are concerned then?
Correct.
Okay. Thank you very much, Maria. Appreciate it.
Thanks. Yes, please.
I'll make a motion that we recommend that the Board of Directors of PDA grant amended site plan approval with the stipulation that
That a revised landscaping plan be provided.
be provided and
review.
and be provided for review and reflect the comments that were discussed here tonight.
Second? Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? And the chair votes aye. Thank you. Thank you, Maria, for coming. We do have one public hearing left, which is the proposed amendments to the planning board's site plan review regulations.
And this is, I would like to do a more extensive review, but someday we will have the staff time to do it. But right now, what we're proposing are three small changes that are really, two of them are more in the order of technical ones, housekeeping changes. One is really one that addresses an issue that we've found. I need to find the copy. So the first one, currently we have when we revised the site plan review regulations, we provided for an exemption for small projects, and it really is it's a all or nothing type thing. It basically says if a building permit is submitted that meets three criteria, the planning director shall make a determination that the project is exempt. We found some issues where there are some significant changes in landscape or something, or even lighting, that would not violate any of those three criteria, and they would be required to be exempt from site plan review. I would prefer to have a provision that says the planning director may determine, to give us some flexibility, because if there's a site plan change that I really feel does require some further review, that I have the ability to keep it in the site plan process. So that's the first one. The second one is an item that was brought up shortly after we've adopted the site plan review regulations, and I've never gone through and made a revision, which is that the state law requires that a licensed surveyor do as-built plans rather than a licensed civil engineer. So this is just to bring things in accordance with state law. And the third one is to clarify. We have two sections of our ordinances, of our site plan review regulations. One that says we may want a photometric plan. The other says we must have a photometric plan. And the planning board can always waive that. So I would prefer that we get rid of the may and just have the must, and then we can always go back. So these are the three changes that I'm recommending at this point. I do have, as I've noted in the memo, I would like to look at broadening our standards for traffic impact studies. Right now we have very specific standards for drive-through facilities, but no standards for other uses. And it seems like we should provide standards for those in the future. And also, I want to get into providing some specific standards for bicycle parking facilities. There's some other issues I'd like to come up with too, like look at some changes in the standards for submission of plans. But those will come as time permits. And so I'm recommending these three changes at this point.
Okay. Need a motion?
I'll make a motion that we vote to amend the site plan review regulations as set forth in the document titled Site Plan Review Regulations, Proposed Amendments, October 2011.
Second.
Seconded. Discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? And the chair votes aye. That concludes our public hearings. We'll move on to City Council referrals and requests, of which we have three. Item D we acted on earlier. The first item is the letter from Tony LaCava of 95 Mechanic Street regarding the sale of his property.
As the memo states, this is the property that is between the Pierce Island Bridge and the Mechanic Street pump station. Tony LaCava has offered to sell the city this property. As noted in the memo, and as you can see from the plan that was submitted to you, it's a very complicated area. The actual property that Mr. LaCava owns is fairly small, but there is development on a pier over the water beyond his property line. He also uses some city-owned land under a lease from the city, which is an extension of Gate Street, and so you can see how that all relates. So the intent of this would be to recommend that the city acquire the La Cava property at 95 Mechanic Street and all interest in adjacent land between the pump station and the Pierce Island Bridge. That would provide opportunity for upgrading and expansion of the pump station as we continue to upgrade our wastewater system.
I have a question.
Mr. Rice?
How will the purchase price be determined?
That will be determined by the city council. I'm not, it probably is done through an appraisal, but that's not really the planning board's recommendation is to determine whether it should or should not be acquired.
Because when I read this, the thing that jumped out at me was that as a citizen, not just a planner, I would want to have like an independent arm's length appraisal done of this before the city bid on it. I'd like to see that appraisal not coming from the assessor's office, but coming from some other. I know it's difficult, but with malice towards none. But just
I mean, we typically do that. In that.
Okay, I just want to make sure that process is being followed.
Always, yeah.
Can you do you know the answer? Can you expound just a bit? Just I'm curious.
Well, for example, when we what was the land that we just purchased that we had
The island?
Was that Sagamore
that we
Creek?
just sold the Baroni land. You know, we had an independent realtor, and I forget the exact terminology they used. John, you would know.
Not a market analysis.
Fair market value.
What a fair market value of what it was. Yeah, and that's typically what we do. I mean, the Sagamore island that we looked at. I mean, we look at the assessed value. We don't. If someone offers us a property for $1 million, we don't say, great. We do have independent
A full-blown
assessment.
appraisal is done.
Well, it's
not necessarily a full-blown appraisal.
Okay, all right. Again,
just to explain a couple things. On the case of the island and in the case of the property that's going to be conveyed to Baroni, those are unique situations. So there was an offer there was a suggested purchase price, and the role of the independent real estate person was to just determine whether that was an appropriate price given the range of things that we're looking at. You know, in terms of the Constitution Avenue site, it was a piece of a larger parcel, and it was full of ledge and that kind of thing. But it also obviously had benefit to the purchaser. So the appraiser looked at all of those issues and tried to determine whether I think it was $20,000 that was offered what made sense from an overall market point of view without actually being a full-blown appraisal. There were no comps to look at, for example.
Right.
The same thing with the island. There's no real comps to look at. So it was looking at what it had been appraised at, what the reduction in appraised value was through the assessors, and so forth. So that, or assessed value, I should say assessed value rather than appraised value. In this case, because it is actually it's a combination of things. It's a house on a very small lot, but it's also structure over water, and it's also property that is leased from the city and is using some existing city land. It's a very complicated thing. It's probably not going to be a very easy way to find a comp for this, but we will look for something that is an arm's length type of thing.
Right. I'm saying if the city is going to end up spending several hundreds of thousands of dollars to purchase this property, that $400 to $600 for a fee appraisal is pretty.
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Very good point, John. And
Yep.
it is always done.
Thank you. So I think we had
sitting up in my chair yesterday when I saw that.
a motion and a second. Any further discussion?
Yeah.
Yes, Ms. Robertson,
I
sorry.
just wanted to emphasize the fact, as Engineer Dave Allen notes in the memo, the fact that whether the sewage treatment facility stays on Pierce Island or that flow gets redirected to Pease, I think ownership of this property will be important for the city in the future. So whatever happens, we know that's out there for us soon, unfortunately.
Yeah. So thank you. I'll call the vote. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? The chair votes aye. Thank you. Letter from Linda Smith, NHDOT, regarding an offer for the acquisition of land is required for the reconstruction of the U.S. Route 1 bypass.
And this is a taking for the reconstruction of that intersection of the bypass and Lafayette Road. It's a request to acquire 300 square feet of property and a 100 square foot temporary slope easement. As Dave Allen has indicated in his memo, this acquisition will have no impact on the city's pump station, which will still be approximately 42 feet from the proposed property line, and the DPW has recommended approval of the land transfer and temporary slope easement. And then our recommendation is that the planning board vote to recommend that the city approved this requested land transfer and temporary slope easement.
Okay.
I'll make a motion that we do that.
Second.
Second. Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? And the chair votes aye. Last city council referral and request is a letter from Paul Sanderson regarding whether the city has an interest in purchasing land off of Spinney Road for conservation purposes.
Thank you. Well, this is as noted, it's a request from Mr. Sanderson. Mr. Sanderson is here. Also, Peter Britz is here if the board has questions or wishes to hear a presentation. The Conservation Commission, as noted in the memo, has met twice with Mr. Sanderson and Eric Weinrib. I guess he's not here. He's left. But this is, and we actually had staff do a site walk last week, I believe, just to look at the land, for considering it for possible recreation purposes. No determination has been made. Initially, there were two options that were presented to the Conservation Commission: development of a 9-lot subdivision, which has been presented informally to the Technical Advisory Committee. That 9-lot subdivision would leave 8 acres as open space, and the other option that was presented was no development with the entire 12.7 acre tract preserved. As I note, the third option assumes really that the city would acquire the entire tract either for conservation or recreation purposes. Subsequently, the idea has been presented to look at a 5-lot subdivision that would have a somewhat larger area preserved as open space, but we haven't seen any plans for that, so we don't know exactly. We've seen conceptual plans, but we haven't seen how much land would be available for that. The wetland area, which is the back portion of the site that's really surrounded by all the residential properties around the perimeter, would obviously remain protected to a large degree. Under any of these scenarios, it couldn't be developed. The Conservation Commission members did express some interest in the 5-lot subdivision option as protecting more upland than the 9-lot option, because it is a mix of upland and wetland. But there's been no discussion of any cost for any acquisition. There's no specific proposal before the board, so no action is required, and I didn't have any recommendation, but it's on the agenda. We're reporting back to you, and I think the Mark West report in the package?
Yes.
So you have some information about the natural resource values, and that's our report.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Hayden?
I think it would be helpful maybe to Mr. Sanderson and maybe to the Concom and maybe to us to have some discussion on it. And I'll just, these are my observations from reading the Concom's report back on this and reading the West report, that there's sort of some lukewarm interest on behalf of the Concom, and I think, that's, Paul would agree that's what he heard, and Peter too. And so therefore, my thinking is probably acquisition of the whole parcel is off the table, even though I think Paul would love to see the family farm not developed, what's left of it. And I have a concern, and I think we need to think carefully about how to proceed, because we have or are going to have a subdivision before us, and we need to be very careful not to connect these two things, or we need to be careful to figure out how to separate them so that we're not too much influencing what we might or might not approve for subdivision, or what we might or might not approve for conditional use, depending upon what we might want to actually acquire. So I will just caution you in your discussion on that to think about, in fairness to the applicant, we need to kind of tread carefully there, I think, because we will have a development proposal before us unless we purchase the whole parcel, and I'm not hearing a ton of support for purchasing the whole parcel, at least from the Concom level, so be curious to see what the board thinks.
Mr. Blenkinsop?
I guess it's sort of hard for me, without a discussion about, I don't know where I'm going with this. It's just all a bunch of possibilities, but I guess I'm not clear on what we would be discussing or talking about. Is it that to express a preference about one of these three options? Is that what we should be talking about, or?
Yes.
Well, when we acquire
What's the horse
property,
and what's the
we acquire it because it has some value to us. You know, can we put a recreation field? We've kind of reviewed that, and no. Can we put, is it a good wildlife habitat? Does it connect with other wildlife corridors? Does it have, you know, vernal pools or endangered species or something that's really important to us? And we say, oh, that's really valuable. It's the Great Bog. We want it. You know, it's Sagamore Island. We want it, whatever. So I think the board needs to think about, does it, as a general concept, do you have interest in conserving some part of this property? And I don't think we necessarily know the answer to that question. I think we might want to go visit the site. 2, we might want to, spend some more time reviewing Mark West's report. But at some point, I think we need to be careful to not get into this modifying a subdivision plan and how many lots it may or may not have based upon how much of the land we might or might not want to acquire at some point for conservation or other purposes.
I think we postpone this. I don't feel.
Right. Oh, and I'm not looking for any action
No,
tonight,
no, but
in order to move it forward, because I think the applicant also wants some direction, so they might proceed with their project. I'll throw it out there. Does the board have interest, either alone or with the Concom, in doing a site visit just about the land acquisition itself?
I do.
I'll agree. I wouldn't mind a site walk of it. It's a big piece of property. I admit I've never been on it myself, driven by it, never explored it myself. That'd be something to see, and if it does have any value.
And my goal would be to just sort of, and again, in fairness to Paul, get it out of the lukewarm phase, because we could stay here for a long time, that, either we have interest in all of it or some of it or none of it.
I have an interest in seeing it. Does that help you?
So perhaps, and Peter and Paul, the Concom has not been out there, right? The Concom has not been.
No. We have not done a site walk with the Concom. And I guess for those of you who don't know me, I'm Paul Sanderson. I'm the trustee of the trust. And what I was really looking for was just exactly the way Cindy had explained it to you. We have been in the pre-preliminary phase, and we've been working with pre-TAC. And there's a 9-lot subdivision possibility, and when I reviewed that with the neighborhood, they said, would you please explore with the city the possibility of conserving some or all of this? And that created the letter to the city council and the referral to this board and also to the Concom. And we're trying to complete that process. Her comments are very well taken, and I am in no way looking for any sort of expression as to whether you like this or you like that. It's only a question of whether you want to keep going along this direction until you can come with a firm recommendation, either proceed to design something or go off and do a standard subdivision. That's really all I'm looking for, and I'm happy to facilitate whatever I can for you with a site walk to go and show you the property, and then take whatever guidance you have back from me as to either proceed to a subdivision or continue discussions. That's really what we're looking for. Thank you.
Okay. I think we have our answer. So we don't need to vote on this then?
Don't need to vote. We can. We will schedule.
Okay. All right. Thank you for coming in, by the way.
Thank you.
That concludes our city council referrals and requests. I have 2 items under new business. Item A, the request of Tane Property LLC for a 1-year extension of site plan approval granted on October 21st, 2010 for property located at 195 Commerce Way. You need a motion on that, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
So moved.
Second.
Second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? And the chair votes aye as well. Item B, request of Tane Property LLC for a 1-year extension of site plan approval granted on October 21st, 2010 for property located at 215 Commerce Way.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? The chair votes aye. We'll move on to Planning Director's report, of which there were 4 items before adjournment. Item A, the request for rezoning of land on Bartlett and Kate Street.
I have to say, I've actually added a few items, so there are actually 7 items.
Oh, no.
You don't need the report. But anyway.
Nothing new the night of the meeting.
The rezoning of land on Bartlett and Kate Street, as you know, in August, the board voted to recommend to the city council that parcel between the railroad tracks and Kate Street with a very small bit of frontage on Bartlett Street be rezoned to business. That went to the city council for public hearing, and at that point, the city council tabled it and requested the planning department to meet with the neighborhood and look at broader rezoning issues, and by that I mean look at the other areas in that area that are zoned either office research or industrial, extending up Bartlett Street to Morning Street, I believe, and on both sides of Bartlett, including the office research district on the North Mill Pond. So we will be setting up that meeting either in November or in early January, we think, to get that.
Oh, early December? Did we skip December?
I'm sorry. Yeah, sorry. Yeah, you're right. Yeah, it comes after.
Yeah.
December comes after. No.
And I thought my motion skills were bad.
Yes.
And the thinking was, Rick, that this would be a neighborhood meeting at
yes.
the Levinson Room where the planning board basically invites the neighborhood to come and talk with their concerns.
So that will be coming up. The second thing is that the city council has requested the planning department and the planning board to consider incorporating subsurface preservation archaeology in site plan review. And we don't actually have a specific, a timeline for that at this point, but we think we'll be bringing something to the board, which may involve like a 2-phase type of approach. First of all, identifying where in the city there might be archaeological hotspots, and really and then incorporating that, maybe developing a map and incorporating that into site plan review regulations. But we don't have a specific proposal at this point. Just want to let you know that that's on the table.
And if I can just add to that discussion a little bit, I mean, whatever we do with archaeological resources, it's going to be a real balancing act so that development can go on, but that we can also respect our archaeology or what's below the surface. And, I think one thing that would be helpful as we proceed, since I don't think there's any other New Hampshire communities that review this with their land use regs, is to have the city attorney make sure that the enabling legislation of the state is there for us to do something. Because I think the other models we're going to find are probably elsewhere. Probably
in less historic places.
Probably.
The third item is the city council is going to be scheduling a work session. I believe that the city manager has proposed December 12th.
And actually, the city council voted that December 12th. Yeah.
December 12th for a work session with the city council, planning board, economic development commission, and historic district commission to discuss downtown hotel construction and city goals.
That's a Monday night, by the way.
Yes, it's the second Monday, so they have their Monday on the previous one, right?
December 12th, 6:30, this room.
They gotta fit.
You'll be getting an invitation and.
Yep.
We just
and-
got it.
Well, but with a more detailed agenda, yeah.
All right.
As to.
Then I just want to let you know about some development projects that are coming up pretty soon. 1390 Lafayette Road, the former Yokins, is coming up. They've been talking with the TAC in work session about a project that would be a phased, they're proposing a phased project, and we don't deal with we haven't really dealt with phasing of projects very much, but they're talking about a Rite Aid pharmacy with a drive-through close to the hotel side of the property, away from Beverly Hill Road, and a coffee shop or potentially a bank with a drive-through on the Beverly Hill side of the property, and maybe another retail, or definitely another retail pad behind, sort of facing the Market Basket Plaza. It's a challenging site because of circulation, because of the number of drive-throughs that are being proposed, and they're potentially going to look at the gateway plan development, which would allow them to do some residential on the back of the site instead of a retail site. There's also, as you may know, there's a separate parcel behind this site that it has a life estate on it, so they may be trying to plan around that as well. So that site, there's no application for it, but they're considering coming to a formal work session with the Technical Advisory Committee on November 29th. The second one is the Bourneville Jeep site, 720 Lafayette Road, which we actually have just received a site plan application for, so the planning board could potentially see this at November or December. Again, a Goodwill thrift store with a drive-up drop-off, so it's sort of like a drive-through. Another coffee shop with a drive-through. We can't get enough of coffee, and definitely don't want to get in your car to get it. And a retail and restaurant space. Again, a challenging site right where the bypass merges in with Lafayette Road. Both of these developments will need to go to the Board of Adjustment for special exceptions for their drive-throughs, and each of them may be phasing it. And then the Spinney Road subdivision, which I've already mentioned to you, that's gone through a work session with the TAC, and will be coming back at some point in the future. So those are some pretty significant developments that are going to be coming before you in the not too distant future. At the last meeting, 218 Griffin Road, the FedEx facility, the board voted to approve a conditional use permit contingent on review and approval by TAC, and just wanted to report that actually had happened. There were changes which included increasing the depth of asphalt for more stability for the road and protecting the wetlands from construction impacts, and so that has taken place. Item F, Henry and Jacqueline Brandt have appealed the board's grant of subdivision approval. They've specifically appealed the stipulations that I recommended and that you incorporated in the approval relating to the determination about the buildability of the new lot that they were going to be creating. So that has just been filed, I think, last week, and the city attorney and I will be meeting on it to prepare a response to that. And finally, I just wanted to say, announce, I'm sure you all know by now, bless you. I'm sure you all know by now that the American Planning Association has designated Market Street and Market Square as a great street for 2011. And it's in recognition of both the historic character of the street and also the great work that both the city boards have done and the city residents and the city departments, really, in terms of providing infrastructure. So I think that's a testament to everything everybody here has been doing for the past 30 years.
Great. Well, I'd like to thank Brian again for coming. It's rare that we get out this early, so enjoy it. But welcome. I'm glad you're part of the board, and I want to thank the board in general for allowing us to go past our normal 10 o'clock curfew. So if nobody else has anything, do we have a call for adjournment?
So moved.
Good night. Thank you.
Hey, Brian.